Chapter 1239. Dakra's expression changed to one of ferocious ecstasy. Trolls were not ogres, after all. The two large fangs in their mouths were merely ornaments. What really tore flesh apart were the fangs within. However, they were only average, and not even comparable to carnivorous creatures like sharks. The hands of the two holy knights were not so easy to bite. Just the high-quality epic-level gauntlets alone were enough to knock out his own teeth. To Dakra, Duque daring to step on him while wearing cloth boots was no different from courting death. So he did not hesitate to extend his neck and bite down. Who knew, just a moment ago, in Dakra's eyes, Duque's leg was no different from a chicken's leg. In the next second, when Duque infused his leg with divine power, it became something completely different in his field of vision and perception. It was as hot as lava, as violent as lightning, as dark as the convergence of all the evil in the world. Dakra's poor knowledge made it impossible for him to understand how this could happen. Bite with his teeth? What kind of joke was that? Even if his teeth were as sharp as a shark's, how could they possibly block this heavy kick that could topple mountains and overturn the heavens and earth? With a loud thud, Dakra let out a muffled groan as his stick-like body fell backwards, lying pathetically on the ground. His mouth full of teeth had turned into bloody shards that flew in all directions. Especially the two long fangs that were unique to trolls. As they spun in mid-air, they were caught by two slender hands from different elves. Huh! The fangs of the last troll chief? Looking at the huge fangs that were drilled with many holes and adorned with troll teeth, Aurelia laughed. She laughed so hard that tears welled up in her eyes. Sister, take good care of it. This is a souvenir that you can't buy even if you have the money. Queen Sylvanas smiled like a flower, her golden hair dancing in the wind. On the surface, Queen Sylvanas looked calm, but upon closer inspection, one could see that her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She was excited too. Think about it. For almost 7,000 years, the border conflicts between the trolls and the high elves had never stopped. Every year, tens to thousands of elves died in territorial conflicts. Even though the elves had always had the upper hand with their runestones, the hatred between them was so deep that they had never understood each other. If Zul Aman was destroyed, the trolls would lose their last base in the Dragonsong Forest. Without Zul Aman's protection, even without the help of the Alliance, the Sin Dorii Kingdom had the ability to exterminate the trolls by themselves. Not to mention the fact that the flying ships had wiped out the main force of the Amani clan here. Sylvanas's blood surged. Just thinking about it made him excited. What outsiders said was their business. Every elf would credit her, the new queen, with the achievement of wiping out the Amani trolls. It had nothing to do with the desire to rule. It was purely because it could dilute the mark left behind by Anastrian's millennia of rule. Only by erasing the influence of this elven traitor could Sin Dorii truly let go of this burden and continue to move forward, standing tall among the nations of the world. Duke smashed Dakra's teeth with a kick, and Gavinrad and Tyrion, who were on either side of him, pushed Dakra to the ground with his staff. Dakra could only use his strong chest muscles to receive Duque's foot. The kick was so heavy that every muscle in Dakra's back was pressed against the hard bricks of the altar. The sound of bricks shattering could be heard from his back. Fresh blood seeped out from all the wounds on his body, staining the stones red. Dakra roared, his face flushed red. His bones creaked, and beads of sweat dripped down his face. He resisted with all his might. His pride, his noble status as the Amani chief, did not allow him to submit to this puny and weak human. However, Duque's kick was as heavy as 1,000 mountains. Dakra used all his strength, but could not move his body, let alone break free. Let go, Duque instructed softly. The two paladins immediately let go. In the next instant, most of Dakra's body was sealed in ice, leaving only his head. Because his neck was under the effect of the deceleration spell, he could only move in slow motion, like a slow-motion camera. The great Amani trolls will never submit. As long as one of us is left, we will fight for all eternity. Dakara, who was suppressed beneath Duque's feet, could not get up at all. Even so, he continued to curse fiercely. I know you want to die. I can grant you that wish, Duque said leisurely. But not today. Today, even if the Burning Legion and the Calamity Army come together, they will not be able to save the Amani trolls. Just watch obediently, watch the last scene of your clansmen's lives. Dakara's face darkened and paled. Today was not just a great humiliation to him. It was the darkest and most terrifying despair. No matter how his people tried to hide, they could still be easily found. Innumerable elves swarmed over from all over the mountains, and the mountains near Zul Aman were all decorated with their unique, intricately patterned war flags. The war songs of the elves rang out, reverberating in every nook and cranny of the forest. What he did not know was that in the second battle at the Dark Portal, the demon spirit warning system that had caused Zhu Jin's trolls to bleed had already been upgraded. The tracking system installed on the flying ships could easily detect any living being within a 3,000-meter radius, and shoot at them with fluorescent materials that could dissipate. In a forest battle, the greatest advantage was concealment. Whoever was found first would lose more than half their lives. Even without looking, the experienced Dakara could tell from the sounds that his tribesmen were running for their lives, while the elves were shooting deadly arrows into the hearts and skulls of the trolls as though they were on a safari. This was the troll's only weakness, which was its super regenerative ability. Dakara finally broke down. He had once been a high and mighty chief. Even in the most difficult times for his people, his strength had still soared. His strength and status were enough for him to look down on all life. Who dared to disrespect him? But today, his strength was useless. His base had been destroyed, and he had even been captured by a human wizard. He could not even save a single one of his men. Dakara lost his composure and shouted in the common language he had once looked down on, "Why? Those long-eared creatures are the invaders. Why must the Amani trolls be destroyed? Why?" Duque's lips curled into a mysterious smile. It's hard to say who was right and who was wrong in the past. The Amani trolls must be destroyed simply because you were on the wrong side. Chapter 1240. If one really had to say who was right and who was wrong, it would really be a mess. Not only did the High Elves snatch the trolls' territory, but all the other races in Azeroth were also fighting for the trolls' territory. After all, during the era of the Darkness Empire, almost all of ancient Kalimdor was the territory of two trolls. Just the Amani Empire alone was about half the size of the Eastern Kingdoms. To be fair, even Duque didn't feel comfortable destroying such an ancient country. It was a pity. You Amani trolls shouldn't have sided with the evil faction that seeks to destroy the world of Azeroth, Duque said in a low voice. Yes, even the Dark Spear trolls of Woking had defected to the Horde. Duque could turn a blind eye and allow the Amani trolls to continue existing. He could even act as a mediator to resolve conflicts between the two sides. Just like how the Night Elves had exiled the High Elves, no matter what, to fight the Burning Legion head-on, they would need as many cannon fodder as they could get. It was a pity that the Amani trolls had sided with the wrong side, so Duque didn't mind using his position to avenge his woman and wipe out the entire Amani race. Dakara was sweating profusely and trembling all over. He was already heavily injured, and now being stepped on by Duque and sealed in ice, he was so enraged that blood gushed out of his lungs and dripped down from the corner of his mouth. He suddenly began to hate his powerful regenerative abilities as a troll. If he was an elf with a weaker body, he might have already breathed his last. Yet, this body kept him alive and didn't let him die. And he had to watch as his own people were slaughtered and his home burned to the ground. Kill me. Duke Marcus. Kill me right now. Dakara howled. Kill you now? That's what I was thinking. But I've changed my mind. Duque crossed his arms and said slowly, it's too easy to kill you. But the opportunity to show the alliance's might doesn't come often. You. At this moment, Dakra finally understood what it meant to be unable to live or die. With a single glance from Duque, someone dragged Daka away to keep an eye on him. Dear, I'll leave it to you. Duque smiled at the Windrunner sisters. The three Windrunner sisters felt that they should be extremely grateful to Duque. However, after carefully experiencing it, they realized that this was not gratitude, but absolute worship, even to the point of faith. 3 days later, the streets of New Silvermoon City were empty. Almost all the elves had gathered at the new arena. This was not extravagant, brutal pleasure. This arena was built after Queen Sylvia came to power, and it could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Apart from special festivals, there would be elven warriors personally fighting every weekend in order to arouse the martial spirit of Sin Dorii. Today, the elves gathered together to celebrate the destruction of the Amani trolls. Several elven experts, including Queen Sylvie, personally took the field and killed several Amani leaders, including Dakra. In the VIP seats, Illyria couldn't help but reveal an intoxicated expression as she listened to the loud shouts of the elves. Duque said, I thought you'd take the field. Aurelia smiled. Second sister needs something like reputation more than I do. Plus, I'm the general of Silver Dawn now, not Sin Dorii. Duque smiled. Reputation was something that couldn't be seen or touched. You only knew how good it was when you needed it. It was hard to say whether the elves hated the Amani trolls or the scourge that destroyed Silvermoon City the most. The elves' lifespan of thousands of years was too long. To them, the tragic deaths of their friends and family were like yesterday. After Sylvanas became queen, she was able to completely destroy one of the elves' two greatest enemies, the Amani trolls. It could be said that from that moment on, the elves truly recognized her as their queen. Aurelia suddenly sighed. I fought against the Amani trolls for 3,000 years, and suddenly they were destroyed by a new invention from the humans and dwarves. What a strange feeling. I'm thinking, if the high elves were the ones who fell behind and were destroyed. Sasha blinked. If that really happened, what would you do to us, Duque? Would you choose to help the trolls fight the elves? Duque was speechless. Please, the difference in looks is enough for me to abandon the trolls and become an elf lover. As for Sasha, Duque directly teased her. Sorry, unless my cute Sasha runs off to become a troll with 2 canine teeth, I won't choose the trolls. Sasha's face instantly turned red. I don't have canine teeth, much less become a troll. Duque decisively replied, then as long as you and your sister are in the elven race, even if the trolls are 10,000 years more advanced than the elves, I will still choose the elves. Looks are justice. My women are justice. Ahem, it's good that I know this. Of course, I can't say it like that. Aurelia loved him deeply, but she was also a righteous woman. If it came down to it, she would have to choose between him and her people. That choice would definitely make Duque heart ache. Luckily, he wouldn't have that chance. Duque took a deep breath. There's a saying among humans, personality determines fate. I feel that the characteristics of a race determine their achievements and future. Perhaps there are many what-ifs in history, but there is only one final result. Since a race makes such a choice under the influence of both internal and external forces, there will be an inevitable result. Aurelia didn't say anything and listened quietly. I have no intention of denying or distorting history, but I think that whether it's the wisdom of those in power or the will of fate, since humans and elves are progressing bit by bit, this is the achievement of history. When our achievements surpassed those of the trolls who stood on the opposite side of history, everything was set in stone. That's why when humans and elves first allied 2,800 years ago, the trolls had no chance of winning. Especially today, when the individual strength of the trolls can no longer surpass that of magic and technology, it's even more so. The martial arts that you've practiced for decades have become meaningless? How sad. Aurelia sighed. Perhaps. If you want to move forward, if you want your race to continue, you have to lose something. For example, outdated traditions. Duque pointed out this point. In Duque's opinion, at least the exaggerated and arrogant elves were bad habits that had to be abandoned. Aurelia nodded. Yes, it is indeed time for the elves to change. What we need is something more simple and unpretentious. Chapter 1241. In the twisting nether, in the burning legion's new fortress, the Eridar twins were huddled together as they convulsed. They were suffering the most terrible punishment. Other than their skulls, there were countless needle-like objects that kept injecting low-purity dark energy into their bodies. On the other side, a huge, strange, octopus-like tentacle was sucking the dark energy out of the holes in their skulls. This was forcefully reducing their power, and in the process, giving them the greatest pain. It was a classic double punishment of the soul and body. Suddenly, a huge red shadow with a blazing aura descended. It was the commander of the Burning Legion, Kill Jaden. Something must have been flipped, and the convulsing Gemini fell to the ground. Unable to catch her breath, the Gemini immediately knelt down to thank Kill Jaden. Thank you. Great Master. Thank you for your mercy, the Gemini said in unison. I hate mercy. Kill Jaden's voice rumbled. Because mercy means that my idiot underlings have messed up the plan, and I have no other replacements to replace them. Can your stupid brains even begin to understand the feeling of being twice as angry? The Gemini's beautiful and charming body was trembling uncontrollably. Suppressing the fear in their hearts, the Gemini nodded like chicks pecking at grains. I am very disappointed with the dimensional trap plan. You have placed your hopes on the traitors of the Legion and the uncontrollable false gods. It is wrong in itself. The Gemini kowtowed and begged for mercy. Next time, I hope to see a perfect result. I am not interested in the process. I only want the result. If it fails again, I think many lords will be interested to see how I put the two of you, who claim to be beautiful, into the body of a green-skinned lesser demon with eternal transfiguration. After saying that, Kill Jaden's huge shadow that was enough to fill the entire hall disappeared, leaving only two female demon lords who were trembling non-stop, still trapped in the deepest fear. The lesser demons were the lowest and most lowly existence in the Burning Legion. They were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. No demon would care about the life and death of a lesser demon, including any other individual of the lesser demon race. Which Void Duke didn't kill their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood? He could even become an overlord. Just this identity alone was enough to make him the target of envy and hatred from billions of demons. If Gemini really fell to the point of becoming an inferior demon, the number of people who would do violence to them could definitely fill up any planet. The twins looked at each other. There was no need for words. They had known each other for more than 20,000 years, and they could understand each other's thoughts with just a glance. Apart from their deepest fear, they also felt a strong sense of unwillingness. In their eyes, the key to their failure this time was that Azeroth's protective shield was still strong. Although any Void Lord could sense that the magic circle left behind by the Pantheon Titan had weakened, it was still functioning well. At the very least, this could be considered an experiment. It was obviously Kill Jaden's mistake, but unfortunately, the Master is always right. Once there was a mistake, it must be the servant's fault. The twins could only take the blame for this failure. Anyway, the Eridar tribe would never lack cunning and capable female demons. Duque didn't know about the tragedy of the Eridar twins, nor would he care about it. He watched Angela's monster movie with the magic mirror while ordering the air fleet to head south to support William. Stormwind didn't have a ranger team that could fight against the jungle trolls. This time, William used a more simple and violent method. Stranglethorn Vale's terrain was relatively gentler than Zwaman's, which allowed the dwarven steam tanks to be put to good use. Furthermore, the three Bronzebeard brothers had always been fond of William. For this southern expedition to Zul-Gurub, Magni brought out the strongest, lightning, tank army for William to command. The cannons were roaring, and the sound of explosions that symbolized destruction reverberated throughout Stranglethorn Vale. The dwarves used the cannons that Duque had taught them to plow a 5-kilometer-wide path of death in the northern region of Stranglethorn Vale. What? Concealment? That didn't exist. Unless the trolls could instantly turn their skin from green to black like the scorched earth like a chameleon, even if they could survive the terrifying volley of cannons, they wouldn't be able to pass through the line of death that followed. The front row was made up of 3 layers of human swordsmen, shield-bearers, and pikemen. The middle row was made up of dwarven musketeers and harpooneers standing on steam-armored vehicles. The back row was made up of a mix of mortars and archers. With the addition of the Dalajan mages, no trolls would be able to pass through this 50-meter-long zone of death. At night, the flares and expensive magic searchlights lit up the entire front line as if it was daytime. The trolls didn't stand a chance at all. Even if the trolls sent out the Gurubashi berserkers, which were as large as the ogres, it would only increase the number of targets. The new soldiers all expressed that they could shoot live targets, and their experience points increased rapidly. The battle that had been going on for the past few days was more like a planned massacre than a battle. However, the Alliance's luck ended when they advanced to Zul-Gurub. As one of the most important cities of the ancient Troll Empire, Zul-Gurub's terrain could be said to be easy to defend and difficult to attack. Between the endless mountains, there was a river that wasn't considered deep but was abnormally turbid. There were nightmarish things everywhere. In every bush, there could be several or even dozens of venomous snakes jumping out to take your life. Every object that looked like dead wood by the river could very well be a ferocious crocodile. Every time the soldiers went to fetch water, they had to tremble in fear. Inside the river, there were piranhas that could gnaw a living person into a boneless, fleshless human in a minute. However, the mechanized infantry division that the Alliance was so proud of couldn't be deployed in such a terrain. William, Bulang, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance were simply at their wits' end with the current situation. Yet, every day, there were close to 100 casualties among the soldiers. The morale of the Alliance dropped at a speed visible to the naked eye. Magni doted on William so much that he didn't even inform Duque. He secretly brought the newly built flying warship, Iron Hammer, to Zul-Gurub in an attempt to replicate Duque's success with the Amani trolls. It was a pity that Magni and William had suffered a huge loss this time. A group of bats appeared. There were more than 10,000 of them, each the size of a pony. This terrifying number, coupled with the presence of the high-level troll priest, Yekrik Iron Hammer, crashed on its first voyage. More than 800 dwarves and human soldiers died along with it. Chapter 1242. In Stranglethorn Vale's Alliance command, the higher-ups of the Alliance were debating endlessly. "Can't we just blow up all the ravines?" William asked. Bulang rolled his eyes at William. "First, gunpowder requires money. Second, even if we had so much gunpowder, you wouldn't be able to pay for it even if you spent 100 years of Stormwind's taxes. Third, this is all damned muddy ground. Heavy cannons can't be transported in at all. The farthest cannons can only shoot for a little more than 12,000 meters, and after 3,000 meters, who knows where the cannonballs will go. Aerial bombardment wouldn't work. There were a few other methods left, but they would all require a huge price in lives and casualties. This might not even guarantee the successful destruction of Zul-Gurub. This was a consequence that none of the countries in the Alliance could bear. Moreover, after fighting for so long, the Alliance had only seen 2 or 3 high-ranking priests. The enemy's boss, the evil god hacker, was nowhere to be seen. William punched the wall in frustration. His exaggerated wrist strength caused a hole to appear in the cement wall. William. The Heaven Breaker is on its way. Actually, Valilla tried to comfort William. William suddenly turned around, his eyes bloodshot from staying up for days and nights. Valilla, you don't understand. Of course, we can give all the most important tasks to Uncle Duque. But what if Uncle Duque isn't around one day? What if we're the only ones left to save the world? I'm not a child anymore. I have to learn to deal with problems independently. Valilla opened her mouth to say something, but Breer Bearskin pulled his old partner back and shook his head at her. Valilla was silent. At this moment, William, who had suddenly stretched his hand out of the cement wall, pinched the cement powder in his hand. As a temporary building, the cement wall of the command wasn't completely dry. It was supposed to be extremely hard and could even be used as a city wall, but now it seemed a little sluggish. When he pinched it hard, it turned into powder. Wait. Uncle Lang, you said that your heavy cannons only lack a strong base? What if I can provide an extremely strong base for the dwarven artillery? William seemed to have thought of something. Bu Lang rolled his eyes. As long as you can get that evil god into the firing range of the artillery, my men will help you blow it up into the sky. But how are you going to get my cannon through so many complicated swamps? Uncle Bu Lang, let me try something else. I don't want you to give me 10,000 tons of explosives. I want 10,000 tons of cement. William slammed the table. Since the Doomsday Army can pollute the Soderer River to block the lifeline of Lordaeron, why can't we use cement to fill every river, every gully, and every inch of mud in Zul-Gurub? William waved his arms excitedly. His assumption was too exaggerated. It sounded a little whimsical, but when he thought about it carefully, it seemed possible. For a moment, even Bu Lang was stunned. The Alliance doesn't seem to have that much cement? Bu Lang could only mutter. William's expression froze upon hearing this answer. At this moment, Duque's voice came at the right time. We didn't have it in the past, but it's different now. Duque led Magni, the 3 Windrunner sisters, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance into the command center. Uncle Duque. You've arrived with the Heaven Breaker? William's face was filled with obvious surprise. Yes, your idea is indeed exaggerated. But since all the conventional tactics don't work, why don't you try your strange idea? Why do you have to restrict your thoughts with so-called common sense and principles? William, I'm on your side this time. Duque smiled as he walked over and patted William's shoulder. Then, cement, Duque smiled. Cement has always been a scarce resource in the Alliance. Almost every city's reconstruction can't do without it. However, the Alliance's supply of cement has always been very low. The main reason is that we had to import the raw material for cement from the Ungoro crater in the Kalimdor continent, limestone, which is mainly volcanic ash. What about now? Bu Lang sensitively noticed the key point in Duque's words. Duque clapped his hands and said an exciting piece of news. Although the Alliance has flooded the molten core according to the agreement with the Hydaxia water elemental creatures, we have never said that we will give up on developing the Black Rock Mountain. With the Black Rock Mountain, which was once a nightmare, the Alliance can easily produce 1,000,000 tons of cement per month. 1,000,000 tons? This shocking figure made all the higher-ups of the Alliance ecstatic. The higher-ups of the Alliance who had used reinforced concrete would no longer be interested in walls made of stone and mud. The hardness of the two was not on the same level. Furthermore, traditional stone walls had the problem of being too heavy. As long as some of the pillars of the wall were destroyed, the weight of the wall would crush it. Originally, because the cement production had always been too low, they had no choice but to use the best steel on the cutting edge. No one had thought that there would be such a benefit after conquering the molten core. How could they not be happy? Zul-Ghurub was very large. As the capital of the Gurubashi Empire, one of the two troll empires, Zul-Ghurub occupied a very large area. Surrounded by huge walls that were somewhat trapezoidal, Zul-Ghurub was more than 300 kilometers wide from east to west, and more than 500 kilometers from north to south. If they attacked the core area forcefully, it was unknown how many people would die. But now, with William's strategy, the alliance could obviously push forward layer by layer. Duke laughed. That's a stupid idea. If we could use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, we wouldn't be able to do so. If we can use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, then the price is obviously worth it. Before rushing to the Sin-Dorii kingdom, the limestone mining of the molten core had actually already begun. Duque directly made the air fleet, which was originally rushing back to the Iron Stove Castle to replenish their ammunition, change their route to the Black Rock Mountain and transport a large amount of limestone over. The alliance used a full half a month to slowly push the front line to the waterfall a little north of the main entrance of Zul-Ghurub. That was an important source of the Zul-Ghurub water system. Hundreds of mixers were lined up on top of the waterfall. According to Duque's instructions, they slowly poured the mixed cement slurry according to the proportion. The cement slurry seemed very thin, but under the huge amount of water from the waterfall, it was instantly washed away to who knows where. But after 3 days, they could clearly see the results. The river in the distance seemed to have become narrower for no reason, and the water flow became more rapid. But the waterways also became distorted. On the 5th day, the main route began to change. On the 7th day, 2 lakes mysteriously dried up. On the 14th day, all the Gurubashi trolls felt that something was wrong. Chapter 1243. At the end of February 22nd, year 22 of the Dark Portal, Zul-Ghurub was supposed to have a high water season. The heavy rainfall directly caused every river in the troll capital to flow terrifyingly fast. This was why the Alliance army had been helpless before. Now, the amount of water in the river suddenly became like a dry year. Looking at the continuous rain in the sky, the trolls panicked. They all ran to ask Hacker's priests. The priests went to the high-ranking priests, and even alarmed Hacker. The problem was that Hacker was the evil god of chaos. This kind of trivial matter in his eyes was not worth disturbing. In a rage, he swallowed many troll believers as sacrifices before he calmed down. Days passed, and the amount of water decreased day by day. A month later, the trolls who had been defending the depths of Zul-Ghurub finally discovered the problem. A large amount of white material flowed down from upstream, blocking up all the rivers. It also caused a large number of piranhas to die. Many amphibious creatures like the crocodiles died, and the ones that were alive were not much better off. Most of them were dying. Some troll hunters tried to dissect the crocodiles' corpses and found that the crocodiles' lungs were filled with a grayish-white material. The trolls finally panicked a little. On a hill near the main entrance to the west of Zul-Ghurub, Duque stood with a group of Alliance powerhouses. They watched as the water of Zul-Ghurub passed through a newly built temporary dam and was diverted into Lake Nafaridi through the former venture capital company's camp. The big shots of the Alliance were all filled with emotion. No one had thought that rivers could be used like this. Especially the dwarves and gnomes. Their eyes were filled with fanaticism as they looked at Duque's back. Once upon a time, all steam technology was viewed as heresy on this continent, and even in the entire world. After all, Azeroth was a world of swords and magic. Duque's appearance changed everything. Even the harshest and most conservative old nobles had to admit that the swords produced by a large dwarven factory in a month could supply the soldiers of an entire kingdom. The economic value of a train track was greater than that of 10,000 carriages. Now, even rivers could be changed, lakes could be drained, and even natural moats could be changed. What else couldn't technology do? If it wasn't for the fact that the weapons brought about by technology were still unable to defeat the most powerful mages and all kinds of special champions and monsters, this might have already become the steampunk world that Duque mentioned. Magni and the other dwarves were full of praises. Magni asked Duque, speaking of which, when did you become a water conservancy expert? How can you be sure that as long as there is enough cement, you can block the river? Duque pursed his lips. Of course he knew. As an engineering student, he had seen too many brutal constructions by construction teams during his internship. For example, the workers would pour the leftover cement into the sewers for convenience. As a result, most of the sewers of the entire building were blocked. It was true that the water would wash away the cement, but a lot of the heavier cement would still be deposited in the river and slowly silted up, forming a dammed lake similar to earthquakes or volcanic activity that would block the valley and silt up the water. Now, Duque had used his engineering knowledge to divert away more than half of the water in Zul-Ghurub. As a result, Zul-Ghurub would have no water to use, and the advancement of the Alliance's army would become smoother. Duque tapped his temple. Knowledge is power. During the 10 years in the void, I read almost all the books in Karazhan. There are many ancient and alien knowledge that you guys will never have the chance to come into contact with in your lifetime. I don't care about the other books, but give us dwarves and gnomes a copy of the books on water conservancy. The conditions are negotiable. Okay. Duque finger was pointing. Everyone knew that wherever Duque pointed, the mountains and rivers would change according to the wishes of mortals. In the legends, this was already a domain that only gods could touch. This was what made mortals the most excited. After everything was settled, Duque patted William's shoulder. All right, do as I say. We will probably be able to launch an all-out attack on hackers' forces in the summer. Understood. William nodded his head heavily. The problem of the trolls has troubled the previous kings of Stormwind for more than 2,000 years. Even though technology has advanced, don't expect to solve the problem of Zul-Ghurub in a short period of time. Don't compare yourself to the Amani trolls. After all, the Amani trolls only have a bunch of divine creatures with a bit of divinity standing behind them, while the Kubarash trolls in Zul-Ghurub have a true god behind them. Even if it's a third-rate evil god, it's still a true god. Once again confirming that his goal was to slay a god, William still felt a surge of excitement ignite in his blood. All right, I'll leave this place to you. I will bring the main forces of the various countries of Lordaeron to Silithus. Don't throw away the elites of our hometown. Duque laughed. Don't worry, I will be very patient. William promised. Duque wasn't interested in Hacker. After all, a third-rate evil god that was weaker than Ragnaros didn't require Duque to personally deal with it. As long as they followed Duque's method and killed the high-ranking priests of Gurubashi one by one, Hacker's power would also be weakened. It would be the best for William to practice his skills. On the other side, because of Duque's plan, Kel-Thuzad had no choice but to use the Scourge army to fight against the Bugmen of Kiraj. Now, there was almost an outcome. Previously, they knew that they had been tricked. After all, both sides were really angry. It was impossible for them to continue to work together to deal with the Alliance and the Horde like before. However, Duque knew that the situation of the battle could change at any time. It was already a pleasant surprise that the two of them had been fighting for so long. Move out the Heaven Breaker. We will catch up with the main force of the Alliance. As early as January, the main force of the Alliance had already started the Western expedition. This time, the army that was preparing to attack Silithus was a huge force consisting of 350,000 soldiers and 400,000 logistical troops. Of course, the so-called 400,000 logistical troops were mostly Theramor's soldiers and civilians. The 350,000 soldiers were divided into 3 parts. The first part was the Night Elves. They set off from the Feathermoon Fortress on the island in the southwest of the Kalimdor continent. The total force was about 50,000, but they were all elite sentries and druids. The second part was the Theramore army. Before the Night Elves joined the alliance, Theramore was the bridgehead of the alliance in Kalimdor. Theramore was far stronger than it had been in history. With Duque's intentional or unintentional refugee diversion and support, Theramore had already become a huge military city-state with 150,000 soldiers and 350,000 accompanying family members. This time, apart from leaving 20,000 troops, Theramore had almost turned out in full force. Chapter 1244. On the Heaven Breaker, the deafening hum of the propellers was blocked by a soundproof magic formation. In addition, when Duque was designing the Heaven Breaker's blueprint, he had repeatedly emphasized the soundproof layer. Sitting on the Heaven Breaker was not as bumpy and shocking as imagined. Instead, it was like sitting on a boat. On the deck at the stern of the Heaven Breaker was the meeting room. Looking at the bright sunshine outside the window and looking down at the drifting clouds below, the big shots of the Alliance who had never been on a flying battleship felt very novel. Because Turalian and the other 3 were missing, Mograine had not recovered from his serious injuries, and Solarian, Gina Goldsword, Sally Whitemane, and the others were assigned to William to fight against Hacker. The strongest combat power of the Alliance this time was much weaker than when they fought the Molten Core. This was something that could not be helped. On the other hand, if Duque had not thought of a way to make Kel, Thuzad and Si Thun fight each other, the situation of the world would probably be worse than it was now. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a large group of huge black shadows shrouded the entire flying fleet. This immediately attracted the attention of the guards, but everyone heaved a sigh of relief after that. It was the giant dragon of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Alexstrasza, the great life-giver, the Red Dragon Queen. Although her dragon form was much smaller than the Heaven Breaker, no one would doubt that the Heaven Breaker was a big toy in her eyes. The huge dragon body shrank rapidly, and when she slowly landed on the main deck, she was that hot and beautiful royal lady again. "Hey! My little Dooku, did you think of me, your sister? Or did you forget about me after conquering this little female dragon?" Alexstrasza teased Duque. Seeing the Red Dragon Queen, Onyxia, who was in the form of Countess Katrana, shrank behind Duque like a mouse seeing a cat. Although she was petite in her human form, she could not hide no matter how much she shrank. "Come out and show your face. You didn't do anything harmful to the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Just admit your mistake, and the great Red Dragon Queen will forgive you." As Duque spoke, he pinched the back of Onyxia's neck, like a mother cat holding a disobedient kitten in its mouth. In the eyes of others, this was as normal as an older brother squeezing his younger sister's neck. However, in the eyes of the Red Dragon Queen, it had a different meaning. Even the back of Duke's neck was. "Huh. How interesting." A playful expression appeared on the red-haired mature woman's face. Onyxia felt as if she had been electrocuted. Whether it was the muscles on her face or her entire body, they were all unnaturally stiff. It was one thing to become Duque's mount, to be ridden day and night. Admitting defeat in front of his fellow Dragon Clan members was another matter altogether. In front of her dead brother, Onyxia didn't feel anything, perhaps because she thought that Nefarian would definitely die. At this moment, he had to lower his head in front of the strongest dragon race, which was also the Black Dragon race's former nemesis. Firstly, he was displeased, and secondly, this was clearly a public execution. Duque was pinching her neck. This was a declaration of his ownership over her. The most important part of her body, the nape of her neck, was kneaded with a moderate amount of force. Onyxia felt like she was about to explode from the shame. She clearly wanted to resist and refused to admit her inferiority in front of Alexstrasza. However, her body was hot, and her face was flushed red. Finally, Onyxia resigned herself to her fate and bowed to the Red Dragon Queen with the etiquette of a human maid. However, she spoke in the dragon language. When translated, the general meaning was, Onyxia, the Sin Dragon under the command of the human Duke Marcus, greets your majesty. The dragons were arrogant. They boasted that they were the origin of all beasts, the existence at the top of the food chain. For her, who had once been enemies with the dragon slumber shrine, to admit that she was the servant of a lowly creature was actually difficult for her. Because it was too shameful, Onyxia already lowered her head as soon as she finished speaking. Well said. Duque pinched her neck and pulled her back. In the eyes of others, he stroked her neck as if he was petting a cat. Huh! How interesting. The playful expression on Alexstrasza's face became even more obvious. However, she quickly put on a serious face. This time, I want to represent the Dragon Slumber Shrine to discuss the matter of Silithus with the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde. Can the Dragon Slumber Shrine send out troops this time? Duque asked. Yes, but not many. I took 500 draconic beasts and demi-dragon from Nozdormu. Together with the other 3 factions of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, it will be 1,000. Please understand, as we have been very busy in the Void battlefield, the Queen replied. Hearing this, the big shots of the Alliance all looked touched. After all, it was very rare for the Dragon Slumber Shrine to directly send out troops. Also, the Queen suddenly handed something that looked like a compass to Duque. Sense it yourself. Duque felt it and was dumbfounded. This wasn't a compass at all. It actually marked the status of the Red Dragon Queen, roughly divided into several levels. I'm very busy, if you dare to bother me, I'll reward you with dragon breath. Busy, not mortal destruction, don't call me. On duty, not mortal destruction, but I probably can't leave. Sound asleep, not world destruction, don't call me. A bit idle, call me if there's anything fun. For example, food. 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 Important things must be repeated 3 times. After looking at the 5th level, Duque rolled his eyes. Alexstrasza was still so capricious. But this thing was an upgraded version of Debt Collector Beats, right? Right now, her status was on duty. Phew. Duque exhaled. No matter what, thank you for the support of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. We mortals will work hard. Alright, I'm very busy. I'll leave it to you this time. The Red Dragon Queen came willfully and left willfully. She was just that cool. However, before she left, the words that came from the compass into Duque's spiritual world made Duque silent for a long time. If this world needs a black dragon to inherit the position of the dragon aspect, do you think you can trust Onyxia? To be honest, Duque didn't know the answer to this either. Planet Azeroth's protective magic circle was so powerful that it could even resist the power of Sargeras. There was a foundation for this, and that was the existence of the 5 dragon aspects. Duque had gotten rid of Nesario earlier than in history. Although this had weakened the power of the evil side, it had also given the demons more opportunities. If the position of the dragon aspect wasn't so important, there wouldn't have been so many dragon aspects in history. Duque shook his head and drove this thought out of his mind. Alright, now let's officially discuss how to deal with Naximas. Chapter 1245. Duque first took out a calendar. First of all, if there are no accidents, Naximas will regain mobility at 9:00 in the morning on March 11th, and the fortress will be able to fly again. Before Duque finished, Magni had already jumped up. Wait. Naximas isn't yours. How can you be so sure that it will regain mobility at this time? Duque looked at Magni as if he was a retard, which made the Dwarf King feel guilty. Magni sat down and mumbled in a low voice, "Fine. You guys who play with magic are all cunning. The whites of Duke's eyes rolled up. Alright, little shorty, you've scolded all the mages. Come to think of it, I just accidentally said it once. Why do you guys remember this kind of sinister curse word so well? Of course, there was no need for Duque to do anything. The newly advanced Breaking Dawn mage Jaina stabbed the shorty in the butt with her ice sword, causing Magni to cry out in pain. Getting back to the main topic, Duque pressed his hands on the military table. As long as Kel Thuzad doesn't break through to demigod level, he can't do anything to me. This is decided by the realm. Please don't worry too much. And so what if he becomes a demigod? Don't forget, Nefarian and Ragnaros also fell at our feet as demigods. Don't forget. Where did you get your top-grade equipment from? The spoils of war from killing a real demigod were really frighteningly rich. At this point, Magni touched his Balrog hammer, and then looked at Gavin Rad, who was hugging the wind sword as if he was hugging his lover, and laughed at the same time. Including Archimonde, the Alliance had already slaughtered 3 demigods. Duque continued, according to the intelligence, Naxxramas originally had a total of 15, or rather, so many leaders. Then because of the Dalajan bombardment and the battle with Kiraj, the most accurate intelligence now is that there are only 6 leaders left. Duque waved his hand, and Vanessa distributed the prepared reports to the big shots. The structural zones structural giant Thaddeus, the military zones for horsemen of the apocalypse, the spider zones Black Witch Farina and the spider Meisner, then the frost dragon Sapphiron and the ice lich Kel Thuzad? Theon flipped through the report and looked at the introduction of the 6 leaders, as well as the frighteningly detailed characteristics and skills of the leaders. He couldn't help but purse his lips. The enemy had no secrets in Duque's eyes. The so-called god of prophecy was nothing more than this, right? Looking at Duque, he couldn't help but sigh. It's a good thing Duque is on our side. At the military conference table, Duque used magic projection to create the latest 3-dimensional projection of Naxxramas. Originally, Naxxramas had 4 districts, but now because the plague zone was completely destroyed by the Dalajan's main cannon bombardment, there are only 3 left. What we need to do is to kill the leaders of the remaining 3 districts as quickly as possible while Kel Thuzad is trapped. As quickly as possible? You mean we should split up? Tyrant frowned. There weren't many strong Alliance fighters participating in this battle, so why should they split up? Yes. There's a very, very important reason here. But I'm sorry, I can't say it now. If you believe me, then please support me. If you don't believe me, then vote. The minority follows the majority, Duque said mysteriously. Everyone couldn't help but narrow their eyes. Aurelia seemed to have thought of something. What about the strong horde fighters? They will help us block the possible arrival of the Kiraj leaders when we attack Naxxramas. Then I have no objections. The so-called vote wasn't even a formality. This was no longer the time when the Alliance was founded 21 years ago. At that time, Duque was inexperienced and young. Now, Duque's prestige and power in the Alliance were absolute. Moreover, everyone trusted him 100%. Without any surprises, the big bosses decided to implement the plan of splitting up. At this time, Naxxramas could be said to be gloomy. The intelligent Undying only felt that the situation wasn't good, but it wasn't to the point where they would explode. Kel Thuzad couldn't help but feel lucky that the undead didn't have morale. They were undead, not blind. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had made such a big move. If they couldn't even find this, then they could just burn their own souls as fuel for the soul torch. But Kel Thuzad was helpless. At the height of the battle, he even thought of giving up Naxxramas and leading the army to escape. However, it wasn't that he didn't want to escape, but that he really couldn't. This was the desert region of Silithus. From the Kiraj temple to the border of Silithus, the nearest place was 300 kilometers away. Let's not talk about the fact that low-level undead would quickly die under the sun, such as the rotten flesh of zombies. Even if they could only protect those who could use the power of darkness to protect their bodies and not die from the sun, it would still be very difficult. Silithus was full of huge insect nests. There were at least 1 million zergs in each of the large hives. If they gave up on the dangerous terrain of Naxxramas and exposed the undead army to the desert plains, destruction would be the only outcome. So Thuzad was dragging it out, trying to drag it out until the fortress's floating system was fixed. However, even with his erudition and superb intelligence, he still couldn't deal with the vicious trap that Duque had left in the flying system. If he directly accessed the intelligent management system that originated from the Titan, questions such as, "What is the catchphrase of the Gale Sword Hero?" would pop up. Thuzad didn't know who the Gale Sword Hero was. He casually answered one, and the system would tell him that the correct answer was, "Pretentious like the wind, always by my side." Thuzad patiently listened to these kinds of questions that simply didn't give him a way out. In the end, there were a lot of questions, each one fresh, and each one a pain in the ass. Not only did he feel that his intelligence had been seriously dragged down, but he also felt deeply humiliated. How could Duque play with the Titan creations that even the Burning Legion couldn't understand so smoothly? And he, Thuzad, just couldn't. He didn't believe it. It had to be said that the great mages who could muddle their way to the Breaking Dawn level were all monsters with at least an IQ of more than 200, or some crazy cheating demon with a system. Thuzad used a stupid method. He used painstaking effort to remove all the remaining willpower from the Titan creations. This was very similar to erasing all the formatting of a computer's hard drive. Without destruction, there could be no construction. He destroyed all the programs and systems, and then reprogrammed the Naxxramas floating system according to his own will. Chapter 1246. Rewriting the program of a creation Titan's creation was definitely not a simple task. After a month of endless research, Thuzad finally figured out that what kept the fortress suspended in the sky depended on the east, south, west, north, center, plus the top and bottom too. There were a total of 7 things called void power furnaces. As a mage who specialized in necromancy, it was truly a thankless task for him to understand things on the scientific side. The most troublesome thing was that the power furnace that was originally located in the plague area was destroyed, which made the entire fortress lose its original balance. Even if the power furnace was operated according to the original design, Thuzad estimated that it was very likely that even if it flew, the fortress would continue to spin at high speed in the air. It would either fly to an unknown place or fall again. Naxxramas was very strong, but that was relatively speaking. If it fell from a high altitude again, it was estimated that if the fortress did not fall apart, all the various creations inside would collapse. There was only one chance. Thuzad made countless virtual models to explore the power and balance problems of the fortress. He even thought about whether to flip the fortress to the west, because the east side was the plague area that was almost completely destroyed. If the west side was facing down, then the most vulnerable east side would be facing up, avoiding the attack of the insects from underground. The only problem was air defense. Once this idea was put forward, it was firmly opposed by his subordinates. Although there was a leader like the big spider Meisner who was not afraid of environmental changes, most of the Undying were still in human form. They simply could not accept that the originally flat ground of Naxxramas had become a huge vertical wall. Moreover, would placing the most vulnerable side in the sky be able to ignore the enemy's attack? There were also a lot of flying insects and enemy leaders. For example, a big green insect called Princess Huhuran or something. The research was once again in trouble. After eliminating more than 300,000 Titan runes that should be meaningless, Kel Thuzad finally found a strange set of unified commands. Generally speaking, when he typed up on the almost blank control panel, the entire fortress would generate an upward force. Typing down would cause it to go down. Ha ha ha. I found it. I found it. Kel Thuzad was ecstatic. He handed over almost all of the defense to the only intelligent leader, the Black Witch Farina, while he focused on breaking the control system of the stronghold. There was no other way. Originally, for the sake of ease of control, Kel Thuzad didn't place too many highly intelligent leaders in the stronghold. Because his will was enough to control the entire fortress. As the battle progressed, the weaker leaders of each district were either killed by the Dalajan's cannons. The only one left who was more intelligent was Farina. The rest were either martial artists, brainless constructs, or otaku liches who focused on forbidden magic and biological research. Farina, I'll leave the defense to you while I focus on researching the flying system of the stronghold. My request is not to let any of the functional areas fall into enemy hands. Don't let them invade the core area. If there's any danger, you must run to me immediately. Understood. The beautiful Dark Witch subconsciously squeezed her Mariana trench, only to realize that she was flirting with a blind man, no, a lich without a penis. However, she was really fascinated by the power. Especially when thousands of soldiers were willing to die under her command. The pleasure brought by supreme power almost made her moan with joy. But soon, she couldn't laugh anymore. As a mage, her aptitude was second-rate. If he knew her character, Kel Thuzad wouldn't have been interested in sending her to the front lines. As a result, she was basically a spectator in the war against the insects. The terrifying sea of insects almost stunned her from the start. As a last resort, she sent the powerful abominations and the Death Knights early on. Oh! The twin emperors were the two leaders of the Angela Temple, second only to Si Thun. Their combat power was not the strongest under Si Thun's command, but they were undoubtedly the most suitable to be commanders. Almost as soon as the Scourge's reaction became slow, the brothers sensed it. But they didn't respond immediately. After fighting for so many months, they were very clear about how difficult it was to deal with the Lich leader Kel Thuzad. They instinctively suspected that this was a trap. However, when they secretly changed the composition of the attacking troops, using the high-mobility flying insects to beat the abominations who lacked cover, and using the long-range attack insects to tease the Death Knights, they confirmed that the enemy's commander had changed. Thus, an even grander and more meticulous attack was launched. Attacking separately, creating a diversion, all kinds of tactical combinations made the Scourge under Farina's command lose their bearings. But the Scourge was still considered a large force. The Liches continued to use the corpses to create abominations and other undead warriors, using more troops to maintain the front lines from collapsing. Until March 11th. In the northwest of Silithus stood the newly built fortress of the Cenarian Circle. On this day, this fortress, built with natural magic in the desert, welcomed an endless stream of troops. Green-skinned orcs, mostly lilac elves, and white-skinned humans. 3 long lines of soldiers stretched from the edge of the fortress to the sky. Along with them were huge dragon men and dragon beasts. What was even more unimaginable was that the dwarves were chanting, and since the fall of Naxxramas, they had been laying the railway at an astonishing speed of 3,500 meters per day. The steam locomotive transported the pre-built prefabricated rails to the end of the railway, and the dwarven construction workers carried them and laid the railway. Because of the conspiracy of a transmigrator, 5 years ago, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement, a high-quality dual-gauge railway was built from the Tanaris Desert to the Ngoro crater from the hot sand port in the southeast of the Kalimdor continent, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement. All the dwarven workers had to do now was to build from the crater's pass to the Cenarian Circle, a distance of more than 100 kilometers. With the railway, there would be artillery, and there would be a steady stream of supplies. Kel Thuzad had a deep understanding of the Alliance's tactics. Duque had single-handedly brought Naxxramas here as cannon fodder, so he had long been sensitive to the Alliance's actions. Now that the Alliance tribe and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had come together, everyone knew that after the Alliance had settled the internal strife, they had freed up their hands and were ready to pick up the pieces. Kel Thuzad couldn't take it anymore, and announced to the entire fortress, "Attention all members of the Scourge, the fortress has begun to move." Chapter 1247. The activation of the stronghold was nothing to the brainless low-grade undead. But for the high-grade undead who still had some ideas, it was definitely something to secretly breathe a sigh of relief. No one wanted to be destroyed, even if they had already died once. The undead had no morale to speak of, but the high-grade undead were more intelligent. Seeing that the swarm was large, the necromancers began to be less stingy with their magic and began to release large-scale magic. Plague clouds and wide-area shadow magic covered the main roads of Naxxramas, and the insects easily fell to their deaths. Their bodies blocked the insects that came later, and it was all a mess. Kel Thuzad, who was in the control room at the core of the stronghold, was actually very conflicted. He wasn't sure if the command group summarized from the basic control commands was really the source command. After all, the prosperity of the Pantheon was already 25,000 years ago. With Sargeras's burning crusade, he killed many titans and burned a large number of titan creations. The authentic titan language had been lost. Most of the titan creations obtained from the Burning Legion had been modified by demons. Similarly, the titan creations occasionally obtained in the world of Azeroth had been modified countless times over the years. Even the language had been modified. Kel Thuzad carefully compared the source command he found. For example, this sentence, good. Good. Study. Day. Day. Up. Kel Thuzad was sure that this was different from all the languages he knew. It was different from the common human language, and it was definitely not a variant of Elvish, Troll, Eridar, etc., because the words, sentences, and grammar were all different. It should be the language of some destroyed country or race, Kel Thuzad was sure. He had no choice. He had to get Naxxramas out of danger as soon as possible. There was a real god behind Angela, and it was an evil god with a bad temper. Before the Lich King woke up, if he and his Naxxramas were destroyed here, it would be a waste. It was unknown whether the Lich King would avenge him in the future. In front of them was the Insect Tide, and behind them was the allied forces of the Sleeping Dragon Alliance. Stuck in the middle, there was only destruction. So he could only gamble. The huge bone palm that was the size of a water basin pressed firmly on the purplish-blue control screen of the void power furnace that gave off a technological feel. Kel Thuzad shouted, "Up! Up! Up!" The entire stronghold shook violently. The fortress that had fallen for a long time had a mysterious energy radiance on its bumpy outer wall. Mysterious patterns spread out like water ripples, as if they were rippling and spreading. An ice-cold aura spread out, but everyone felt that this was a blood-boiling ancient beast awakening, bearing its shining fangs at all existences that were spying on it. Yes. That's right. That was it. Kel Thuzad was extremely excited. Not only him, but the other leaders of the Calamity Troop were also excited. Lord Kurtaz, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, rode his undead warhorse and charged at the hundreds of giant insects in front of him. Meteor. The Death Knight, who was a dwarf in his previous life, suddenly raised his right hand and summoned a huge flaming meteor, which shot towards the hundreds of insects at the entrance of the tunnel. The hundreds of insects in front were instantly turned into charcoal, and the insects in the back didn't fare any better. In the face of the unstoppable force, they were directly blown away and fell out of the passage of Naxxramas. Ha ha ha. As expected of Lord Kel Thuzad. Finally, I don't have to look at those disgusting insects every day. Black Witch Farina let out a long sigh of relief, showing an expression of relief. After she took over the command, the Calamity Troop was once beaten like dogs, and the other leaders were quite critical of her. Since Kel Thuzad had regained control of the fortress, then she had successfully retreated. She thought about many things. Although she had suffered a great loss in command, at least she hadn't collapsed. Maybe I can be promoted to the chief of a certain area with this achievement? Seeing that they were getting further and further away from the ground, the insects below became smaller and smaller. Seeing that they were about to escape the sea of suffering, Farina couldn't help but look forward to it. At this moment, Naxxramas suddenly jumped violently, giving Kel Thuzad and all the undead creatures a shock. Then, without any warning, the entire flying fortress began to lose its ability to float and plummeted to the ground. No, no, no. What are you doing? I want you to rise. Up. 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 Kel Thuzad screamed. He quickly scanned the control panel with his scarlet eyes of the soul, only to see that on the control panel, almost all the data was normal. The only problem was that the system seemed to judge that he wanted to go down, not up. What was going on? The more Kel Thuzad shouted, up, the faster the fortress fell. With no other choice, he could only try to say, down. In the end, it fell even faster. Bam, accompanied by a loud sound that shook the heavens and the earth, Naxxramas once again smashed onto the temple of Ankh-Kiraj. Because it had risen for a distance before falling, this time it didn't fall on the ground, but directly smashed the first level of the temple and the first underground level. The undead in Naxxramas naturally lost their arms and legs, and the cursing sect disciples who were still alive also suffered serious casualties. Without giving the Calamity Troop any time to react, the fortress actually flew up again, but this time it was about the same. It flew up to a height of 500 meters, then fell down again. Then, a minute later, it flew up again and fell down. This time, it was like a pile driver smashing back and forth, smashing the second underground level. On the Heaven Breaker, the big shots of the Alliance watched this scene with their mouths agape. When Naxxramas smashed in, it was like dog sh*t. Alright, if the first time was dog sh*t, then the second time was dog sh*t, and the third time was dog sh*t with a mace. That was terrible. Gavin Rad originally wanted to say something dirty, but he suddenly realized that the atmosphere was a bit inappropriate, so he could only ask, "Boss, did you secretly control Naxxramas? Then are you going to smash this flying fortress like a walnut?" Smash? How could a Titan's creation be so simple? Besides, both sides haven't even used their ultimate moves yet. But it's going to happen soon. Duque murmured. This was practically confirming what Duque had said. The next moment, the entire temple of Ankh-Kiraj seemed to come alive. From every hole in the temple, a thick tentacle with eyes extended out. The blue eyeballs at the top of the tentacles looked like a dense patch of seaweed from afar. These eyes were so ominous and terrifying. Even if you had trypophobia or not, just looking at them would make you feel nauseous. Chapter 1248. These giant eye tentacles were the eyes of the ancient evil god Si-Thun, and also its tentacles. If these tentacles with eyes were treated as onlookers who came to watch the show, it would be hilarious. 3 seconds later, hundreds of giant eye tentacles widened their eyes at the same time. Rays of natural light, similar to a chain of lightning, shot straight into every passageway and hole in the outer wall of Naxxramas. Almost without a sound, tens of thousands of insects, together with their enemies, turned into ashes in this huge lightning-like electric net, turning into nothingness. Feeling the sudden high-energy reaction from below the temple, Kel Thuzad was scared out of his wits. With all his strength, he forcibly injected his magic into the control system, trying to use his own magic circuit to connect with the control circuit of the Titan's power furnace. Get up! Get up! This kind of violent cracking was something Kel-Thuzad had always avoided. After all, he didn't know what the consequences would be if he connected his magic circuit to a power furnace with such a huge energy requirement. Perhaps he would gain control of the system, or the power furnace would drain his magic in reverse. This was another big gamble. He didn't know if he had gambled correctly or lost. Anyway, the whole of Naxxramas rose slowly for the fourth time. However, this time Xiaofan should be furious, and it was not going to let go of this fortress that had provoked its divine power again and again. What's more, the fortress itself had the Titan aura that it hated. If it couldn't enslave the Titan creation, then it would completely destroy it. In less than 3 seconds, a huge red beam of light with a diameter of at least 50 meters shot straight up from the ground, broke through the thick rock layer, and shot straight at Naxxramas, who had just flown up. Kel-Thuzad was so scared that his teeth almost broke. He no longer cared about holding back. This time, he crushed a peculiar rune stone that he took out from his interspatial bag. Originally, this treasure, which was personally given to him by Lich King Arthas before he fell asleep, should have been his last resort. Unfortunately, he could no longer hold back. An incomparably gorgeous white light suddenly poured out of the suspended fortress. Bystanders could see from afar that huge clusters of ice were surging out of every window, every passageway, and every hole on the outer wall of the fortress that had been blasted open. In less than 1/100th of a second, these ice clusters formed an incomparably dense forest of icicles, and within 1/10th of a second, the entire fortress was wrapped in ice like a ball. This was a big move that was completely beyond the imagination of mortals. Perhaps only such a move could withstand the terrifying blow from Xiaofan. The special skill, like the frozen tomb, collided with Xiaofan's dark flash in midair. At that moment, the entire sky of Silithus seemed to flicker with the brilliance of the laws and elements. The clouds in the sky were instantly blasted apart. Even so, on the dissipating clouds, everywhere that could be projected, there were still dense purplish-black flame patterns appearing. At the same time, more dark energy was attacking the huge ice ball that covered the entire flying fortress. Under the flickering light, the spectators in the distance could clearly see the faint silver network that was flashing under the layer of ice. Duque said solemnly, "Are those the lines of law?" Not every powerhouse could see so many lines. Everyone could only see that the violent explosion and the turbulence of energy had turned the entire sky into a mess. The aftermath of the explosion spread in all directions, with Naxxramas as the center. As if there was a moment of delay, a shock wave that swept through everything erupted. In just half a second, tens of thousands of on-Kiraj flying insects were directly crushed into large and small pieces by the shock wave, falling from the sky like a heavy rain. The powerful elemental energy fluctuations caused all the surveillance magic mirrors to lose their images. This didn't matter. Even from 10,000 meters away, on the suspended heaven breaker, they could still clearly see the huge cloud of flames rising in the distance. Duque turned back and said to the powerhouses of the Alliance, "It's not so easy to take advantage of them. These days, which powerhouse doesn't have 1 or 2 trump cards? If we had rushed up just now." Everyone knew the answer. At any moment, the heaven breaker, which represented the most advanced technology in the Alliance, would have been affected by Naxxramas's wide area of ice, or by Xiaofan's dark flash, and swept into the turbulence of destruction. That would have been a classic case of being buried with them. Okay. Send the attack signal. If we don't go, Naxxramas will fall into Xiaofan's hands. 3 red signal flares rose into the sky and exploded in the clear, cloudless sky. The red ball-shaped signal flares looked like 3 large fireworks. Sal raised the hammer of destruction high. Loktar! Loktar! 50,000 orcs raised the metal weapons in their hands, wearing heavy armor, and began to advance towards the Kiraj temple from 10 kilometers away. Further ahead, there were thousands of dragons and half-dragons. They would be the vanguard of the Allied forces. On the left, there were dwarf steam tanks equipped with sand filters and dust grills. On the right, there were more than 10,000 human cavalry. 1 kilometer behind the orcs, there was a neat central square formed by a mix of humans, dwarf gunners, Dalajan mages, and elven archers. The task of all the mortal armies was to deal with Kiraj's insect army. Thuzad's heart was bleeding. The ultimate move that his master had given him was something that would kill 10,000 enemies at the cost of 7,000 soldiers. Freezing all of Naxxramas would certainly be able to withstand such a powerful attack. But the price? In just an instant, all the fragile items in the fortress were destroyed by the expanding ice cubes in a single breath. Fragile skeletons and rotten zombies, all kinds of precious experimental equipment and information, and of course, the cursing disciples who were originally alive. As the leader of the cursed god, Thuzad definitely understood the importance of having living subordinates. It was because of these living people that he could rope in the fallen nobles and do things better in the human world. Now, other than the Black Witch Farina, there was no one else alive in the entire fortress. Clenching his teeth, Thuzad shouted, "Unseal." The ice seal could not last long. Otherwise, even the undead would have all kinds of trouble. However, just as Naxxramas unsealed the ice seal and moved westward in an attempt to escape the Silithus area as soon as possible, the fortress once again shook violently. This time, it was no longer a problem with the fortress's floating system. Not good. The Alliance's flying ship has crashed right in. Chapter 1249. Be careful. Duque warned as he watched the Alliance's powerhouses split into two groups. This was the enemy's territory. Even if they had the upper hand in the early stages, they could never be too careful. Duque didn't specifically say anything to his women. He had already said what he wanted to say last night. He and Aurelia were lovers, as well as like-minded comrades. Petty words of love were not suitable for them. Before they left, they expressed their love with an affectionate gaze. Ever since Turayan's disappearance, the Alliance had become short on manpower. After racking his brains, Duque finally decided on the teams. The ones going to the structure area were Magni, Gavin Rad, Benedettas, Aurelia, Sasha, Edwin Van Cleef, and Alicia. The ones going to the military area were Tyrion, Liadeline, Korea, Tyrande, Sylvanas, Vanessa, and Jaina. Including Duque, who had gone into the spider zone alone, there were exactly 15 of them. The rest were either defending the Alliance's territory or supporting William's side. Sigh. My 40-man hero team. Who knew when he would be able to gather an all-star hero team again? Shaking his head to get the terrible reality out of his mind, Duque turned and set off. On his retina, Duque's vision had completely changed. Unlike the other heroes who advanced slowly and cautiously, Duque was simply unrestrained. After such a long period of observation and attaching all kinds of magical gadgets to the unprepared insects, and even the undying, the three-dimensional map of Naxxramas had long been imprinted in Duque's mind. Although he had also given Jaina and Alicia a copy, the two female spellcasters clearly didn't have such a heaven-defying positioning ability as Duque. When mainstream spellcasters used flash, they would at least see that the foothold was empty before they dared to flash there. Duque wasn't the same. He directly scanned the area and confirmed that it was safe. He didn't care if there were obstacles on the road or if there were visual shielding. Moreover, Duque was very sneaky. He flashed to a blind spot that even the undead couldn't detect, or to the top of a tall building. Of course, he also avoided the spider webs that covered the entire area. Don't underestimate those cobwebs that seem to be gathering dust in the corner. That was because every small spider here was a descendant of the boss of the spider area, the giant spider, Meisner. This humongous female spider the size of a small mountain was the ancestor of all spiders, as well as their ruler. Any foreign existence, as long as it was not from the spider area, would be discovered immediately. Except for Duque. If Farina the Black Witch was still here, she might have sensed the strong arcane waves caused by Duque's high-speed flash. Unfortunately, Farina had been transferred to the central control area. Meisner, who relied too much on his physical senses, did not notice Duque's arrival. This was because every time Duque paused, the tip of his foot would step on a rock that wasn't covered by cobwebs, or even a protruding candlestick or even a torch. To mortal guards, if a torch suddenly went out somewhere, it would definitely attract attention. But spiders were different. Candlesticks that were always lit were places that the spider webs couldn't touch. Small spiders wouldn't go there either. But the necessary candlesticks were necessary for the followers of the cursing sect. This was because most of them were living people, not undead creatures that used their souls to see the way. This was where the blind spot was. Meisner's lair was a huge cylindrical tower with a diameter of at least 100 meters. It was unknown where the pitch-black top led to, and the deep hole that was covered by dense and crisscrossing cobwebs seemed to lead to hell. Strange purple square boulders with golden decorative lace almost covered the entire cylindrical tower tightly. The only entrance was a huge gap that was 2 stories high, and about 3 trucks could pass through it side by side. That was for the giant spider, Meisner, to enter and exit, but usually, the entire gap would be covered by 3 layers of cobwebs. Logically speaking, no creature should be able to bypass Meisner's senses and enter his lair without making a sound. Duque was an exception. Following the route set by the system, Duque turned his body into a streak of arcane light, thin and long. Even the fluctuations of arcane elements didn't touch the cobwebs. In the next instant, Duque had already flown above Meisner's body. At this moment, this giant female spider was just like Duque's impression of it. Its sickle-shaped, furry, and long legs were enough to cast a shadow over any woman's heart. Each of its legs rested on the thickest strand of cobwebs. Even if someone thousands of meters away touched the tiniest strand of cobwebs, the vibrations would be reflected back to Meisner. Then, the intruder would easily be surrounded and killed by the spiders that surged out from the sky and the ground. But Duque beautifully avoided all of these senses. This was Duque's advantage. It was also Duque's killing move. Only by killing the final boss of the spider area as quickly as possible could he regroup with the other 2 teams. Duque drew his sword. The peculiar spiral-shaped sword was like a dark shadow, soundless and silent. It was only when the tip of the sword touched Meisner's skull that it suddenly shone with the most resplendent golden splendor. The golden splendor that blossomed in that instant was the most dazzling of colors, as if it had instantly replaced the dark space. The godly sword special effect, Demon Slayer, activated. If the first half of the sword was like the summoning of hell, strange and secretive, then the second half of the sword was a classic example of shaking the heavens and shaking the earth, like a spring thunder. The golden splendor came from the top of Meisner's skull, silently and forcefully attacking. It was an extremely powerful and shocking sword. Meisner didn't even have the time to tremble in fear. He was already defenseless, and had no choice but to take the attack head-on. Duque was also dirty. He was clearly a wizard, but his most powerful move was to use the godly sword in his hand to assassinate. From killing Sargeras to killing Archerons, it had to be said that after countless experiences, Duque's grasp of the timing of an assassination had reached the pinnacle. Coupled with the godly sword special effect, this sword was simply unstoppable. It was unstoppable. Spiders didn't look like creatures with strong defenses, and their defensive capabilities were only relative. If it was the small steel cannon, that had blasted the orcs to tears in the scorching canyon, even 3 days and 3 nights wouldn't be able to shatter its skull. But with Duque's sneak attack, there could only be one result: the grand final boss of the spider area, Meisner, who had undergone a special transformation and had fused with an unknown amount of evil energy, suddenly opened his terrifying mouth full of spikes. Spiders didn't have a voice, but even so, Duque could still feel that it seemed to be letting out a mournful cry. Very quickly, this soundless cry was cut off. Chapter 1250. Because below its head, a neat black circle had appeared. Although all the carapace and brain matter in the middle had been evaporated by the intense holy light, there was still a hazy, misty black gas at the edge and a foul-smelling slurry dripping into the circle. Suddenly, Duque found that something was wrong. Without even a tenth of a second of hesitation, Duque directly dodged, and the spiral sword pierced into the hard stone wall. The destructive power of the divine weapon was still quite guaranteed. It was obviously a wall of light that did not allow a person to stand on it, but Duque unexpectedly pierced a hole, allowing Duque to hang on it. Meisner's expression changed. The surrounding dark power was constantly replenishing Meisner's body. The source was the fortress itself. The dark power was injected, and a magnificent and strange red color appeared. Duque watched dumbfounded as Meisner's dark back turned scarlet, and the joints of each of its legs grew red barbs in the shape of peppers. What was more exaggerated was that its body had swelled up a size. For a moment, Duque thought that Meisner was going to come back to life. After all, this was the undead's fortress, Naxxrama's. If it was originally a living being, Duque would not find it strange at all if it suddenly came back to life. But Meisner did not come back to life. Even though its feet were still twitching from time to time under the stimulation of the dark power, as if it would make all kinds of climbing movements in the next second, it did not come back to life. In the end, it was just a beast controlled and bound by the dark power, and not a real undead creature. Seeing the system prompt that the boss had been killed, Duque was still not at ease. Once again flashing up, Duque directly followed up with a sword strike, allowing the holy light and flames to flow through Meisner's blood vessels, or perhaps through the channels, throughout his body. Seeing the huge spider burning and shrinking into a ball because of its nervous reflex, Duque was completely relieved this time. Pushing down the boss without looting the corpse was definitely a sin. When Duque burned the spider's silk and opened a treasure chest that had been wrapped in it for an unknown number of times, Duque's heart was simply surprised, happy, and confused. To his surprise, Duque discovered a large number of high-quality spoils of war: twisted limb, digested silk robe, and radiant cloak. These 3 pieces of cloth armor were actually superior to the level of Mount Hygel. Logically speaking, in history, this should have been the second time Naxxramas came out to cause trouble. Based on this deduction, it wouldn't be a level 60 in the game, but a level 80 Naxxramas. What puzzled Duque was that there seemed to be quite a lot of level 60 equipment. Then what the hell is this? The happy part was that Duque had discovered 8 fragments of the artifact, Atish, the legendary guardian's staff, among the spoils of war. That was a chicken drumstick. Ever since Duque inherited Mediva's legacy, he had been thinking about this artifact staff. Duque's hands were trembling with excitement and ecstasy. However, Duque still suppressed his excitement. He thought of the scene where Naxxramas turned into a huge block of ice to block Thun's blow. If I'm not wrong, it should be the power of the Lich King that enhanced the monsters and the leader of the entire fortress. Then the other 2 squads are a little bit in danger. With this thought, Duque couldn't care about anything else. He put the spoils of war into his space bag, and then directly launched a continuous flash to leave. Just by injecting a shadow magic into the corpse of the big spider, at this time, Naxxramas was very lively. A large number of Zergs were killed by the ice seal just now. Even a large number of Doomsday Army soldiers were killed as well. However, the Sky Breaker disregarded everything and stuck its head in. None of the undead knew that the huge golden eagle's bow was actually a ram. When the collision was about to occur, the eagle's beak stretched forward and easily pierced a large hole in the wall of the fortress that was already riddled with holes. When the collision stopped, the cannons on both sides of the Sky Breaker were fully opened, plowing through almost everything that was a threat in sight. After putting down the hero team, the Sky Breaker could still retreat on its own. Together with the Black Pearl and the other two flying battleships, it used ropes to drag Naxxramas and set up a cannonball formation. At a distance of 50 meters, which was almost zero distance for a cannonball battle, they ruthlessly beat up Naxxramas. Not only that, but they also sent out the 101st Airborne Division, which was formed by a certain someone out of bad taste. This elite squad of dwarf gunners, human warriors, and paladins only had 300 people, but they were firmly rooted at the entrance of the fortress like nails, using the cannons as cover, leaving a path of retreat for the Alliance's strong squad. Farina. Continue to command the fortress. Let the leaders defend their own areas and annihilate the invaders at the same time. I must control the fortress again. Kel Thuzad was a little flustered and exasperated as he used magic to inform Farina. Unless he was willing to abandon the fortress, abandon the entire undead army, and run back to the Ice Crown Fortress with a few leaders while preparing to bear the thunderous wrath of the Lich King, he had to hold on until the end. Thump thump thump. Like an inflatable fat man's abomination, it carried rusty iron chains and grappling hooks stained with dark red blood as it took heavy steps towards the Alliance's airborne division. Ready, fire! Along with the shout of Justin Barrett, the captain of the Sky Breaker and a high-ranking commander of the Alliance, the sharpest dwarf gunners accurately fired the cannonballs into the deep and spacious passageways. The roar of the 155mm cannons resounded through the sky. Even if this thing didn't hit, it could still scorch an area of dozens of meters. Did it hit? Huh. Did you see that nearly 4-meter-tall abomination made from rotten flesh? It was directly smashed into meat paste, and even the rotten flesh turned to ash in mid-air. Under the cover of such powerful artillery fire, even the Death Knights with undead warhorses found it difficult to forcefully attack the Alliance elites nailed at the passageway. In the dark main control room, hundreds of light screens flickered continuously. There were real-time battle scenes, as well as various data that symbolized the comparison of forces. No matter how you looked at it, the Calamity Army was in trouble. Farina was flustered. Let the 3rd Squadron of Death Knights fill in and attack the Alliance at the passageway. What about the Gargoyle troops? Do we still have ice dragons? Just as she and her low-level Lich subordinates were busy in the command center, no one noticed that the cobwebs that originally covered the outside of the main control room had quietly changed color. From its original bright and dazzling white color, it turned into a dark matte color. This was not their fault. No one would have thought that the dignified leader of the Spider District, Meisner, would be silently killed in one shot. Chapter 1251. However, as the core of Naxxrama's command center, it was not so easy to break in. In addition to the continuous spider webs covering the entire control room, there were also hundreds of elite Death Knights and abominations guarding it. More importantly, there was a magic shield with no blind spots. If it was a verification type of magic shield, there would be other ways. Unfortunately, ever since a certain someone had successfully infiltrated the Frost Dragon's lair and saved Tyrant and Servanas, who were favored by Kel Thuzad, it would be an insult to the intelligence of the leaders of the Scourge Army if they didn't have any new tricks up their sleeves. The Scourge Army's defensive strategy was to reject all outsiders at the start of the war. Duque, who was hiding in the dark, frowned. This is a bit tricky. Because he foresaw the upcoming series of battles, Duque wanted to preserve as much strength as possible for himself. However, after weighing the pros and cons, Duque still decided that he could not hold back. Let's do it. Duque's eyes sharpened, and his entire body flashed with a bright arcane light. He did not choose to use invisibility. Since he would definitely be discovered, there was no point in sneaking in. Who is it? The Death Knight who abided by his duty discovered Duque immediately. Enemy, the shrill soul cry of the leading Death Knight echoed in the minds of every undead around him. Not only the guards, but even the defensive magic arrays in the surroundings also reacted. Accompanied by a siren that sounded gentle to the living but extremely ear-piercing to the undead, the magic towers that were already in a combat-ready state shot dozens of violent shadow arrows at Duque. This was not ordinary shadow magic. The purity of the magic was enough to make an ordinary Breaking Dawn mage speechless, not to mention that the magic contained strange curses. If it was an ordinary Radiant Moon mage, even one arrow would be enough to kill him. This scene of shadow arrow rain whistling towards Duque, with an unstoppable momentum that could destroy everything in its path. Indeed, Duque could activate Ice Barrier to open a refrigerator and adjust the concentration of frost elements in his body to the highest, rejecting other magical elements as much as possible. But then? Duque made a decision that no one would have thought of. He maintained his high-speed sprint with long strides. Idiot! The Death Knight leader's face that had not completely rotted squeezed out a sarcastic expression. That was a bad plan. What a terrible plan. How could mortals resist such concentrated magic power with their flesh and blood? Even if it was Thuzad himself, he wouldn't be able to take this wave of shadow arrow rain without using a powerful magic shield. Rumble. A loud explosion resounded, followed by the impact of the shadow energy. The marble floor tiles, which were so solid that even the frost wyrms couldn't crush them with their feet, and were reinforced with magical defensive arrays, instantly turned into honeycombs. The sculptures and decorations on both sides of the tunnel were easily destroyed by the aftermath of the shadow energy, turning into dust and scattering with the wind. Not to mention Duque, who was being attacked by the dark arrow hail. In that instant it was as if Sargeras, the Demon King in his perfect state, had personally unleashed his thunderous fury. Whistling sounds could be heard, and the shadow arrows that were shot from the magic towers in all directions could no longer be called arrows. The black lightning, which was as thick as a water tank, was simply a cannon with unparalleled power. Poof! When a large mass of dense black cannon flames landed on the ground where Duque was, the ground that was the size of half a football field disappeared without a sound. A bottomless hole was blasted in the ground. Only the aftermath of the shadow energy, which was similar to black smoke, instantly appeared on the ground, telling what had happened here in that instant. After all, no Undying had ever seen what the magical defensive system of the control center looked like when it was activated. Now they had all seen it. This was only the first volley of shadow bolts. What would happen if all the mana stored in the mana system were to be unleashed? Wouldn't that pierce through the entire bottom of the fortress? Or even sink the fortress and destroy the enemy and the entire lower level of the fortress? Such a scene made all the Undying present shudder, but they also had a kind of twisted ecstasy. Perhaps, even if it was a genuine demigod, he would be blown into ashes in an instant, and his soul would fly away and scatter. Of course, the main control room was alarmed. Looking at the silent annihilation of the ground and Duque who had disappeared without a trace, the Black Witch Farina found that her body was actually filled with a perverted ecstasy and excitement. Because the moment the alarm rang, she recognized that the person who came was the one who made Thuzad and the entire Scourge army lose their heads and faces. Even His Majesty the Lich King, Arthas, had fallen in his hands, Duke Marcus. Now, such a peerless mortal powerhouse had actually been killed by her, the Great Black Witch. Wasn't this a great merit? Ha ha ha. Dead, right? Dead, right? Do you think Naxxramas is your backyard? Do you think you can casually enter the great kingdom of the dead? Ha ha ha. How dare you defy His Majesty the Lich King? Destruction is your only fate. Farina's delicate face was flushed with a sickly red. She suddenly thought, if Duque did not die in that blow just now, but was only half dead, such as having only the upper half of his body left, then she could personally lead him into the kingdom of the dead. Perhaps because she guided the most powerful Breaking Dawn Archmage to become a great lich, with such a merit, her position in the Calamity Army could be raised to a higher level. A second later, her pink pupils suddenly shrank. There was shock on her delicate face, and her pink shoulder-length hair trembled along with her body. What did she see? A shadow that should not exist. It was an amalgamation of shadow energy that was completely different from the overflowing energy. No one knew what it was, but it was obvious that it was not a natural creation. Under the gaze of hundreds of Undying, the shadow energy that seemed to be dissipating a quarter of an hour ago gathered together in the next instant, forming a standard human figure. Black hair, black facial features, black skin, and even black clothes. There was not a single part of this male wizard's body that was not filled with shadow energy. What made the Undyings even more alarmed was that the shadow elemental energy drifting in the surroundings actually began to gather on his body like rivers flowing into the sea. The amount of shadow elemental energy that poured into his body every second was enough to create 10 Breaking Dawn shadow archmages, but his absorption of shadow force seemed to be endless. Yes. He was Duke Marcus, the one who should have died to the shadow arrow rain a few seconds ago. Chapter 1252. Impossible. The Undyings who had wanted to watch a good show and pick up the bones of the strongest person in the Alliance to show off were all dumbfounded. That was shadow energy, after all. Compared to the positive energy of life, holy energy, shadow energy was widely recognized as the power of the dead. How could Duque ignore such a terrifying rain of shadow arrows? And he himself had shadow energy that was so powerful that even a commander-level expert could only look up to. What was going on? Not just the Death Knights, even Farina, who was still in the control room, was dumbfounded. At this moment, she had completely lost the ability to speak. Duque retreated from his shadow form and returned to his original appearance. His expression was completely indifferent. He smiled faintly, swept his gaze, and slowly said, "What other tricks do you have? While I'm still standing here, I haven't made a move. If you want to deal with me, at least you still have a chance. Once I make a move, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to deal with me anymore." Deep in the enemy's formation, it was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Facing a siege, he treated the enemies as if they were nothing. What kind of spirit and confidence was this? For a moment, almost every member of the Scourge army who had a brain was trembling. The ghostly fire in the Death Knight's eye sockets flickered. Farina's alluring body trembled uncontrollably. "Kel Thuzad, come to the main control room." Farina shouted in shock. But there was no response. The magical message that should have been transmitted to the outside world suddenly collided with a layer of purplish-blue arcane energy outside the main control room. The arcane energy formed a larger cover, tightly wrapping the main control room. All the arcane elemental magic was absorbed by this cover. This was the crushing of a higher-level mystery over a lower-level mystery. As long as the level of magic did not surpass Duque, no one could use magic to send messages in such a limited space. Meisner! Meisner! Sound the alarm. Hurry up and inform Kel Thuzad. Farina grabbed a thick strand of spider silk in the main control room. As a leader of the spider area, she knew very well that as long as she pulled the spider's main stem, the big spider would definitely sense it immediately. However, even after pulling a dozen times, all of the fluctuations were like stones sinking into the sea, without a sound. Farina's heart sank. The door of the main control room suddenly collapsed with a loud bang. The huge and heavy thorium door landed on the ground, crushing the two Calamity skeleton warriors guarding the door into a pile of broken bones. Without hesitation, Farina cast Poison Arrow Rain with her left hand and Rain of Flames with her right hand. Both attacks were aimed at the gate. Logically speaking, this kind of terrifying poison magic was enough to instantly turn 50 hate beasts into a pool of pus. They would be finished in an instant, and not even their bones would be left. High-intensity flames also had a similar power. However, as one of Farina's few trump cards, these two spells were easily neutralized. Duque didn't even use any additional counterspells. He just stood at the gate and used Vast Ice Barrier to block the attack. Be it venom or flames, when these two spells blasted onto the shield, they were all swept aside by the ice tornado that moved in a clockwise direction. Duque even had the time to separate the poison from the flames and bounce them back. The venom, which emitted a strong stench, corroded all the mid-tier liches on Farina's left into lumps of unsightly bone mixture. The flames, which had dissipated quite a bit, burned the liches on her right into ashes. Even the ashes drifted away in the wind. Farina couldn't help but shiver. She had originally thought that if she could use the magic defense system to kill Duque, no, even if she succeeded, she would become a great hero of the Calamity Army. Dreams were beautiful, but reality was cruel. The defense of the main control room represented almost the strongest defense of Naxxramas. This was a defense system that could easily kill a Breaking Dawn-level powerhouse. If even this level of defense could not stop Duque, then other than Kel Thuzad, who might have some trump cards, no one in the whole of Naxxramas would be a match for Duque. Suddenly, Farina threw away the magic staff in her hand and raised her hands high in surrender. Then, she actually knelt down and prostrated herself to Duque. Don't kill me. I surrender. Her voice was clearly trembling with fear, but for some reason, Farina's voice sounded extremely charming. She also knelt in an ORZ posture. Because of the angle, when Farina raised her head and looked at Duque with pitiful eyes, from this subtle angle, Farina's exposed Mariana trench could be seen through the drooping collar. Not only was it white, but it also seemed to be bottomless. It really made people want to explore it. Looking down from above, the round buttocks were a strong visual impact. Great Alliance Commander, I surrender. The Alliance doesn't kill prisoners, right? I'm willing to do anything you want, even if you want me to become the lowliest servant in Marcus Mansion. I only ask the Great Alliance to spare my life. I am willing to offer my loyalty to you. As she spoke, her face became sad, and tears appeared at the corners of her eyes. Her pitiful temperament, coupled with her black lace robe that looked like a morning dress, really fulfilled the old saying, if you want to be beautiful, you will wear a suit of mourning. Such a scene, if Duque did not know about Farina's background, he might really have been soft-hearted and chosen to die in order to complete the special achievement of Undead Collection. Duque strode forward, smiled coldly, and used his left hand to grab Farina's neck, raising her high. Cough cough. No. Spare me. This time, Farina was really scared out of her wits. She wanted to struggle, but she was afraid that her struggle would really anger Duque. Because she found that not only did Duque's left arm have the strength of a Tauren, but he was also strangling her neck. His thumb and index finger were pressing against her chin. Although the other fingers were also very strong, it was not to the extent that she could not breathe or speak. It was just uncomfortable. There's still a chance. When Farina gave up resisting and was about to continue to sell her body, Duque's voice reached her ears like a demon from hell. I didn't kill you immediately because I want you to die knowing the truth. Do you really think I don't know what you've done? You married 6 young nobles and killed them all without leaving a trace like a black widow spider. Through inheriting your late husband's family property, you became one of the richest women in Lordaeron during Tarina's reign. Farina's face instantly turned pale. No, this is all slander. I didn't kill them. Chapter 1253. Duque looked at Farina as if she was retarded. His black eyes, which seemed to be able to see through all the secrets in the world, made Farina feel guilty. No. It's true. They all died in accidents. Yes, accidents. That's true for people in this era. Otherwise, you wouldn't have changed 6 husbands in a row. So many people couldn't find anything wrong with you. Duque smiled. I have to say, when it comes to patience and creativity in killing, I really can't think of anyone who can compare to you. Farina's body trembled violently. For a moment, she wanted to use all the magic in her body to fight to the death. But she immediately realized that Duque's hand not only choked her neck, but also sealed all her magic circuits. Now she really became a weak woman who couldn't even fight a chicken. She could only continue to act pitiful. Your first husband actually had epilepsy. He would occasionally rush into the water by himself. You didn't use any magic. You only used a lot of psychological hints when he was asleep to induce the disease. As a result, he jumped into the river and drowned 3 days after the wedding. Farina trembled all over. Although she didn't know what epilepsy was, it was indeed a symptom. Your second husband was very fat. In fact, he always had high blood pressure and high blood cholesterol. So, when you got engaged, you kept rewarding him with a lot of cheese and high-fat food. As a result, he fell ill less than a week after the wedding. I didn't even touch your body before I died. Yes, for people in this era, there's no cure for heart disease caused by blood vessel blockage. Duque continued to tell them one by one. When he finished telling them the causes of death of Farina's 6 ex-husbands, the Dark Witch had already stopped trembling. If it weren't for her weak breathing, anyone would think that she was already a dead person. She knew that Duque would never let her go. Although Duque was known as the enemy of the queen, and almost all the queens in the world were rumored to have an affair with Duque, even if it was just a rumor, it still reflected how picky Duque's taste was. She was of low birth and had killed 6 husbands. With Duque's taste, how could he covet her beauty? It was laughable that she had thought that she could make Duque fall head over heels for her by surrendering and selling her beauty. She even thought that he would hand over the power of the alliance to her. Men conquer the world, women conquer men. This was an iron rule that she had tried and tested thousands of times. This time, it really hit a steel plate and directly smashed it into pieces. In the end, Farina asked, I want to know, what happened to Meisner? Duque smiled without saying a word. He simply tossed out a huge mandible from his interspatial bag. The mandible was still stained with fresh blood. With a little work, it could be made into a very barbaric 2-handed sledgehammer. It was the same in history, because that level 213 epic grade hammer was called Mandible. Farina was in despair. Completely and utterly in despair. She really could not imagine that Duque could actually silently kill off such a powerful beast leader who was the best at scouting. No wonder he could save her from under Kel Thuzad's nose. It turned out that the Scourge Fortress, Naxxramas, was like his own backyard in Duque's eyes. Without the hope of survival, the last layer of shame was torn off. Then there was no need to hide their hostility. Farina screamed hysterically, it's useless for you to kill me. My soul will return to the Lich King. Next time, I will return as the most powerful Lich. But remember. You ruined my beauty. You forced me to become a dirty and ugly undead. I will make you pay for this 1,000 times over. Ah, noisy. Duque snorted coldly. The Dark Witch could no longer speak. Her whole body was tightly wrapped in an even darker shadow power. The shadow power, which was shaped like a large black egg, frantically poured into her body. She resisted, but the shadow power still forced its way into her body. It was impossible for her body to withstand such a huge amount of shadow energy. In less than 3 seconds, her body had completely melted into the shadow energy. The evil dark witch Farina was dead. This was not the end. However, things did not go as she wished. Her soul returned to the Lich King's flag, waiting for the Lich King to wake up and grant her a new life. Then, she would become a powerful lich like Kel Thuzad. Soon, a cold wind accompanied the soul. The next moment, Farina's soul emerged from the shadow power. She stared at everything in front of her with wide eyes, shocked and angry. She opened her mouth, but all that came out was a soundless roar. She tried to use all means to express her anger and dissatisfaction, but unfortunately, it was useless. In front of her seemed to be a huge and solid soul prison, completely sealing off all the power she had when she was alive. As soon as she looked up, she saw Duque's big face with a mocking expression outside the soul barrier. Yes. Compared to her soul, which had shrunk to the size of a palm, Duque's body was undoubtedly huge. Impossible. How did you do it? This is definitely not a mage's domain. Farina let out a shrill scream. According to the decibel, Farina's scream had already reached the level of Banshee's wail. Unfortunately, this was a soul prison that Duque had created. How could it be a trap for itself? Duque smiled and replied with the soul voice, "Sorry, your Doomsday Army's information on me is too outdated. Didn't anyone tell you that I obtained shadow power because I received Archimonde's finger of death in the Battle of Mount Hyjal? As for the fact that Duque had become a Void Lord in the Ancient War, the Burning Legion would not have exposed it if Duque had not mentioned it." Kill Jaden, who was deeply ashamed, would not have exposed it to Zul, who was still a pitiful soul slave at that time. Under the double concealment, this secret from 10,000 years ago became the straw that broke the camel's back for Farina. "I won't." Farina had not finished speaking. Her soul had already been ignited like dry firewood. Her soul should not have felt anything, but she felt that the temperature of her body was rising rapidly, and a burning sensation spread throughout her body. She subconsciously took off her spiritual outer clothing, but even when her clothes were taken off, she did not feel the slightest drop in temperature. On the contrary, Farina felt as though her soul was being roasted in the mouth of an erupting volcano. The high temperature seemed to be able to burn her soul to ashes at any time and completely destroy it. "No, Farina's soul screamed with all its might to vent the pain that came from the depths of her soul. Chapter 1254. Is it painful? Is it hopeless? If you want relief, it's good that you've surrendered to me. Duque stretched out a finger and easily broke through the soul barrier, gently poking Farina's spiritual belly. The shrunken soul of the Black Witch was now the size of a Barbie doll. Her entire body was burning with soul flames, and she instinctively wanted anything that could save her. Just like a drowning person who was on the verge of death, she would grab hold of anything that could save her. Farina immediately felt the cold breath from Duque's little finger. Without hesitation, she hugged it. The scene looked very strange. A doll-like soul of a beautiful woman hugged a pillar-like little finger, greedily seeking the cold breath from it. "Huh? Are you using my finger as a pillow?" Duque teased. But the next moment, Duque retracted his finger. Farina's soul crashed miserably against the soul barrier, and once again fell into the flames of soul punishment. She could not help but let out another painful scream and moan. "Black Witch! Surrender to me, Duke Marcus. Otherwise, you will suffer in this eternal flame for at least 10,000 years. 10,000 years? No, spare me, I can't go on for another minute." Farina, who had turned into a little soul, cried and shouted. She decisively gave up what little restraint she had left. Was she a vicious woman? Yes. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been those classic 6 murders. Was she a person of strong will? No. She had strived to enter the upper class and enjoy the most extravagant life. She had never been someone who could endure hardship. After realizing that her soul could no longer escape, and that she had no choice but to endure the most terrifying soul punishment, the only thing she could do now was to shake at the master of this prison, the master of Duque, who also controlled her soul. Tail. Beg. Pity. Duque stuck his finger in again. The doll-like Farina hugged Duque's little finger and kissed it madly. She couldn't wait to show Duque her most precious thing. Of course, she was not referring to her delicate body that had seduced countless young male nobles from the Rotterdam. Instead, she was referring to the information about the Calamity Army. Of course, Duque could use the soul-searching technique. The problem was that the soul-searching technique could only be used when there was a huge difference in soul power. It was very easy for a leader to make a mistake. For example, if the other party's willpower was strong enough, it was very likely that they would obtain nothing, or perhaps they would obtain a fragmented piece of soul information. For example, even if Arthas killed his own master, Uther, he would not be able to do anything to Uther's soul. Therefore, making the other party yield was the most ideal. Duke Marcus. I, Farina, beg for your mercy. Please allow me to become your loyal soul slave. At your service. I will burn them for you. The doll-like Farina hugged Duque's finger, yearning for the cold touch. At this moment, after she poured out everything she knew that there was no turning back. No matter what the reason was, Kel Thuzad and the Lich King Arthas would not spare her. Because what she had given him was the secret list of the cursing sect spies in the Alliance. Consciousness. Alright, you shall be my elemental emissary. This time, Duque was really satisfied. Praise you. Great Master. Farina opened up her soul, allowing Duque's shadow power to invade every corner of her soul. Now, the only thing she desired was to be completely conquered by him, to satisfy her empty and frightened soul. Because of betrayal, she desired a stronger backer and stronger power. It sounded very ironic, right? However, as the shadow power continued to pour in, Farina's previous pursuits and misgivings about the Calamity Army had all disappeared from her mind. She was like the most loyal hound, longing for the orders from her master. As the shadow power strengthened her soul, she moaned in agony, praying for the arrival of the master's orders that symbolized happiness. When Farina came back to her senses, she found herself back in the main control room, facing dozens of flashing magic mirror screens. Duque was still standing in front of her with a smile. She raised her hands in shock and found that her body was still there. I'm fine? Farina asked herself in shock. The next second, she realized that her body had changed. She was still breathing. She was still alive. However, the thing that kept her alive was no longer her heart and brain. It was the shadow energy lurking in her heart and every bone in her body. Apart from her life signs, she was already a shadow elemental life form in her bones. Moreover, at least half of her soul was in Duque's hands. She could clearly feel this. Suddenly, her body trembled. Her mouth twitched, but she still lowered her head and said to Duque, Master. Good. You know what I'm going to do, right? The Dark Witch was very smart. She immediately understood. I can't order commander-level beings. Duque didn't mind. As long as all the other troubles are gone. Understood. The Dark Witch took a deep breath and turned around. She was once again the temporary commander of Naxxramas. All undead, pay attention. We must gather our forces and drive out the damn alliance in one fell swoop. 3rd Death Knight Squad, hurry to E3. 5th Abomination Squad, go. Farina methodically ordered all of Naxxramas' troops to gather in the direction of the Sky Breaker. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing wrong with her command. But when you considered that she had even sent away the troops that were fighting with the two alliance powerhouses, it was a bit of a joke. Damn it! What's going on? Is that stupid woman just going to let those alliance powerhouses come and go? The Death Knights who were about to snipe Magni and the others couldn't help but curse. Follow orders. Copies. Aren't the 4 Death Knights guarding the military zone? The Death Knights were all knights and even holy knights when they were alive. They had inherited their martial arts and military discipline. No matter how unwilling they were, they still chose to follow orders. In the end, the Alliance heroes saw the surging undead army retreat like the tide. What the hell? Magni muttered. The powerhouses all looked at each other. At this time, the Alliance near the Sky Breaker had a deeper understanding. When the Sky Breaker's captain, Justin Barrett, saw that the enemy had gathered almost all of their forces here, his face turned green. Who knew that in the next moment, Naxxramas would change drastically? Chapter 1255. Seeing so many Death Knights, abominations, and even frost dragons swarming over, the hundreds of elite professionals of the Alliance had already given up on any hope of survival. At this time, the most urgent order to retreat came. Retreat? Immediately? The leading professional still wanted to persist, but he heard Justin's roar, "Don't be stubborn. Commander Marcus is going to use his ultimate move. If you don't want to die with bones, get back here. I'll cover you with artillery fire." Those who dared to attack Naxxramas were all men of steel. Many of them were the core members of the Silver Dawn. Perhaps they had all imagined that if they failed and were killed, they might even become the hated undead. But as long as they were still alive, they would fight for their families, for their kingdom, and for this world. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of dying meaninglessly. If they had to retreat for the sake of retreating, they would rather die. If it was about Duke K's ultimate move, then it would really be laughable. His ultimate move had been praised by countless people. The earliest was during the first battle at the Dark Portal, when he burned down Stormwind City and conveniently buried 100,000 orcs. Every single professionist shivered and quickly retreated. At this time, the fiercest cannon sound came from the Heaven Breaker. Fire all the cannons. It doesn't matter even if the cannons explode. As long as we can save the brave warriors of the Alliance, it will be our victory. Justin shouted. The dwarf cannoneers naturally fired with all their might. Ignoring the hot cannoneers that retreated from the cannons, the dwarf cannoneers used God's Descent to throw and load the cannoneers. They didn't need to aim, since the cannoneers wouldn't be able to hit them at such a close distance. For a moment, the roar of the cannons and the huge smoke almost enveloped the entire Heaven Breaker. The ship couldn't be seen anymore. While the cannons suppressed the undead army, the elites of the Alliance quickly retreated along the Iron Chain Bridge. They barely managed to retreat 90%. At this time, the Iron Chain Bridge on the side of Naxxramas shook violently, as if it was hit by a violent earthquake. Suddenly, the entire flying fortress shook. On the Heaven Breaker, which relied on its propellers to keep itself afloat, the Alliance soldiers were able to see everything even more clearly. Outside the undead fortress of Naxxramas, a giant skull that was either a decoration or a magical creation began to slide down the slope of the fortress. As the gigantic skeleton sculpture that was the size of 2 football fields fell, the undead army that was about to besiege the Alliance's elites fell. Just like broken building blocks, the trapezoidal area that was filled with Death Knights and abominations and other high-level undead actually followed the skeleton carvings and peeled off from the Naxxramas fortress. The whole thing fell downwards, and it was still the Kiraj temple below. Ah, this was not a scream. The undead didn't have the emotion of fear. It was the Death Knights who were cursing. The Death Knights were pitiful. They weren't Frost Dragon Knights. The proud dragon race wouldn't be willing to be ridden by humans or other species even after they died. In the end, the Death Knight was in despair. He was riding an undead warhorse that could not fly. Right now, he was at least 500 meters from the ground. With his shadow magic power, if he was skilled enough, he could activate Death's Grasp in time to catch something when he was about to fall to the ground. Then, the Death Knights probably wouldn't break their legs. The undead warhorses would definitely break their leg bones. As for the abominations, they could only pray for themselves. Falling from such a height of 500 meters, they would probably be crushed into meat paste. Without their warhorses, the combat power of the Death Knights would drop by at least 30%. Under such circumstances, if they were to face the never-ending bug nest in despair, it would really be laughable. This is. Almost every Alliance warrior had a look of utter shock on their faces. It seemed that the love-hate relationship between the Scourge Army and the Bug Army wasn't enough. This time, they didn't even give the Scourge Army a way out. Justin saw something. He said vaguely but mysteriously, "It seems that the Heavenbreaker will have to come to Naxxramas often in the future." In the main control room, curses came from almost every communication circuit, as well as reproaches from the four horsemen of the apocalypse. However, Farina ignored all of them. In the name of the commander, she pulled all the remaining troops of the Scourge Army to the edge of the area, and then stripped the entire building area in the name of damage to the area. The entire stronghold was quiet. Farina knelt down, prostrated herself on the ground, and said in the most respectful tone, "Great Master Marcus, now except for the spider eggs that have not yet hatched in the spider area, and a small number of remnants who refused to obey orders just now, the stronghold is relatively clean." Duque suddenly wanted to laugh. Laugh if you want to laugh. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Duque's arrogant laughter echoed throughout the entire main control room. At his feet, Farina shivered and could only put on a smile. Because she really couldn't figure out what this new master, who seemed to take every possibility into account, was thinking. This time, Duque really made a profit. Originally, he thought that Kel Thuzad would most likely give command to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Unfortunately, there weren't so many hypotheses in the world. If it weren't for Kel Thuzad seeing that Farina was the backbone of the cursing church and one of the few rational high-ranking leaders, the command of Naxxramas would not have fallen into her hands. In terms of pure commanding ability, the four horsemen of the apocalypse were much stronger than her. Why her? Because the Death Knights were destined to be loyal to Arthas. Kel Thuzad was loyal to the Lich King, but he also had his own little calculations. It was just that now he had shot himself in the foot. As expected, Kel Thuzad's exasperated voice suddenly appeared in the main control room along with his projection. That was true. If Kel Thuzad couldn't sense such a big thing when several building areas of the stronghold fell off, then he wouldn't be worthy of being called the Lord of Naxxramas. Farina. You idiot. What did you do? Almost as soon as the projection of the Great Lich appeared, Farina was like a frightened rabbit, hiding behind Duque with incomparable agility. She didn't have the guts to lie on Duque's back or pull on Duque's cloak. She just knelt on Duque's back, trying to make her existence as small as possible, hoping that Kel Thuzad would ignore her. Unfortunately, how could Kel Thuzad not see her? His red eyes suddenly brightened. Duque? Farina, you traitor. Chapter 1256. Chairman Kel's sharp scream made Farina's body tremble like a pendulum. She looked up at Duque, her voice full of pleading. Master, she was not disappointed this time. Duque flung the brilliant cloak in his hands. The purple cloak with yellow trimmings covered Farina's shoulders. Duque's gaze was still full of disdain, but the meaning was clear. Although you are despicable and I look down on you, since you are working for me, I will still protect you. For some reason, Farina suddenly felt a sense of peace. At least this new master did not burn the bridge after crossing the river. He forced her to cheat her old boss, the Scourge Army, and then heartlessly abandoned her. Farina, you bitch. I knew you were unreliable. I should have killed you long ago and destroyed the beauty you are so proud of, so that you would give up and work for the Scourge Army. Kel Thuzad's words were full of viciousness and cruelty, and the Black Witch's heart trembled. However, he changed the topic. Duke Marcus, you are indeed a lady killer. I didn't think. Duque was embarrassed. Wait. You said I cheated you, I admit it. But don't make it sound like I am so hungry that I can't be choosy. Kel Thuzad, Farina. At this moment, Farina only wanted to find a hard piece of black bread to knock herself to death. She, who boasted of her beauty and mingled with the nobles of Lordaeron, was belittled for the first time. But she could not refute it. Firstly, Duque was her absolute master, and secondly, Duque had good taste. Sigh. Comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. She was so bitter that she could not vent her anger. Even if she had internal injuries, she could only continue to hold it in. Because she still needed Duque's protection. Of course, Duque did not care about the Black Witch's feelings. His face was full of sarcasm. Kel Thuzad, put away your boring threats. You'd better stay on the upper floors. Once I'm done with your lackeys, it'll be your turn. With that, Duque waved his hand and Kel Thuzad's shadow disappeared. After a second, Duque turned to Farina and said, "All right, Kel Thuzad has already sent word of your betrayal back to the Ice Crown Fortress. As soon as Arthis wakes up, she'll receive this good news immediately." This was the so-called way of controlling his subordinates and the heart of an emperor. He knew that Farina wasn't a good person, but he still accepted her. Of course, it was impossible that he didn't have a backup plan. What Duque was doing now was the same as when he took in Majordomo Executus in the Molten Core. Regardless of whether he was sincere or not, as long as he cut off his path of retreat and left behind a super archenemy that could destroy him at any time, as long as his archenemy was not reduced to ashes, he had to maintain his loyalty to Duque. In the face of Duque's coercion, how could Farina refuse? Not only did she kowtow loudly, but she also passionately kissed Duque's boots. Well, only the lowliest subjects, or serfs, who had committed a crime, would do this when they bowed to their lord. In the past 5 years, after Tarina's death, this sort of thing was no longer popular in the alliance. Duque didn't refuse Farina's bow. He couldn't let his guard down when dealing with a Black Widow like this. It wasn't that he couldn't reward her with a sweet date after a slap, but he couldn't be too quick. Duque grabbed her long pink hair and said, "All right, there's nothing for you to do here. Go back to Karazhan and listen to Khadgar. I'll call you if I need anything." Duque directly opened a portal and threw Farina in. Then, he gave Khadgar a few instructions and turned his attention back to the main control room. Duque entered a series of commands on the control panel. Up up down down left right Alibaba. Aya, this series of commands made Duque sigh. Normally, before he transmigrated, only uncles in their 30s would know this series of commands even without Google. Of course, this series of commands still faithfully fulfilled its purpose. Suddenly, the entire main control room flashed, and all the undead language was erased. Instead, a line of even more ancient and sacred words appeared on the screen. This was not an exaggeration. Indeed, every special word and symbol exuded the power of holy light. After all, this floating fortress was a Titan creation left behind by the Pantheon. If it were anyone else, they would probably be at a loss. However, Duque, who had been to the ancient war and had secretly seen a lot of valuable first-hand information from the Burning Legion, could easily use the system to translate it. Please enter the verification code for the ultimate permission rewrite. If it were anyone else, they would definitely be at a loss. But Duque knew what it was. A permission could only be overwritten by a higher permission. This was why Sargera's betrayal of the Pantheon had caused such a huge casualty to the Titans. Sargeras was a member of the Titans, and his main profession was combat, so his authority was very high. He annihilated his compatriots while plundering the authority of the other Titans. Therefore, a considerable part of the precious heritage of the Pantheon fell into his hands. Now, the Lich King Zul was actually just a little traitor without any Titan authority. Of course, he would not have the authority of the Titans' creations. On the contrary, Duque had it. Because no matter how it had been modified, his spiral sword, Duque's moral integrity, was essentially a derivative of the Quell Zerum, created by the Titans themselves. When Duque took out the spiral sword and inserted it into a hole in the control panel that rose from the ground, the text on the fortress's system screen suddenly changed. Detected the forging traces of Forger Kazigaros. Detected the enchantment mark of Dreamweaver Norganon. Confirmed the highest authority. After detection, the holder of the highest authority is not of the Titan race. Please state your identity, holder of the highest authority. A few minutes before inserting the sword, Du was still in a shadowy form, a black man that could not be any darker. Now, Duque's whole body was bathed in golden light. At first glance, he looked like the most holy saint. Duque began his performance in the Titan language analyzed by the system with an incomparable tone of a charlatan. Yes, I am not a Titan. But I am the heir of the Titan's will. I obtained the great Quell Zerum by chance, which is the derivative of the Iskani Punisher. From this moment on, I understand my destiny. I am willing to inherit the will of the great Pantheon and protect planet Azeroth for the Pantheon. And I solemnly promise that as long as any Titan from the Pantheon except the traitor Sargeras comes, I will unconditionally hand over the highest authority of this fortress. Chapter 1257. Duque's words were righteous, awe-inspiring, and selfless. Those who didn't know would be moved by Duque to the point of tears and snot flowing down their faces. Not only did he openly confess his lowly identity, but he also promised that once the Master came, he would give up ownership. He was simply a living example of an honest and reliable young man in the new era. In fact, the above touching was all bullsh*t. Because only the transmigrators knew that the Titans of the Pantheon had all been killed by Sargerasa. They were all dead. But the Titans, as godlike existences, were also very powerful. They were dead, but they died very uncleanly, and all kinds of gods will remain in the world. It must be known that all high-grade Titan systems had their own intelligence. There was absolutely no good ending for forcibly taking it. Or it was like Kel Thuzad, who could use it, but couldn't obtain full authority. Once they encountered an existence with higher authority, they would be done for. So what if they died uncleanly? Didn't you hear Duque deliberately leave a verbal trap, emphasizing that he would only give up the authority if he came? Duque's system elf had evaluated at the control center of Naxxramas probably had the intelligence of a human 10-year-old child. Its intelligence was not high, but it absolutely abided by the rules left behind by the Titans. It would automatically make a choice in favor of the will of the Titans. Therefore, Duque's following words became the last straw that crushed its heart. The glory of the Pantheon is being tarnished by evil. Scan the interior of Naxxramas. Dirty undead creatures and savage arachnids are occupying this place. The glory left behind by the Titans has been tossed around until nothing is left. If the Titans saw this scene, they would be very distressed. I don't ask for permanent power, I just hope that before the great Titans come, the Duke Marcus family can become the temporary guardians of Naxxramas, and protect planet Azeroth with blood and life for the Pantheon. The fortress system was silent for a full 10 seconds before it replied, "Okay. Please put your palm on the console, I will record your physiological information. Huh. Duque put his left hand on it and immediately found that his middle finger was poked by something like a needle. Is this recording my DNA data? The gadgets of the creation titans were indeed high-tech. The fortress system's voice sounded again. Data recording complete. The physiological, genetic, and soul core data of the temporary highest authority holder, Duke Marcus, had been recorded. From now on, I will complete all your orders that are not directed at the Pantheon. Welcome, Commander Marcus. Please give the order. Phew. At this moment, Duque finally let out a long sigh of relief. Done. There were a lot of good things in Naxxramas, but the best thing was not the equipment obtained from killing Kel Thuzad, or even the majority of the fragments of the artifact, Atish, legendary guardian staff, but Naxxramas itself. If one hadn't been to the distorted nether, they wouldn't have been able to truly feel the terror of the Burning Legion's void fleet. If it were the current version of the Sky Breaker, it would probably be a moving target. Only the Dalajan could be considered the true backbone of air defense. Now, Duque had added a heavy bargaining chip to the alliance, the floating fortress, Naxxramas. In the future, if the planetary protection circle with the dragon aspect as the core collapsed, then Naxxramas could work together with the Dalajan to serve as the second barrier to Azeroth. At the very least, it could serve as a barrier to Stormwind City. Now that he had obtained the rights to the fortress, Duke naturally went all out to purify it. At this moment, the two teams of Alliance powerhouses, who were advancing cautiously, suddenly saw Duque's projection. Duque raised his right hand and made a very casual greeting gesture. Yo! I'm your family's Duque. Now I have control of the Naxxramas fortress. I'm ready to play purification and get rid of all those damn eight-legged eggs. You guys stay where you are. If you're afraid, just put on the mask I prepared for you. With that, Duque's figure disappeared. How long have we been here? That guy isn't a fake boss, is he? Gavin Rad routinely teased. Aurelia rolled her eyes at Gavin Rad. I'd rather believe that you're fake than think that Duque is fake. Sasha added, that's right. Kel Thuzad was a dead man when he was alive. He doesn't have a sense of humor like that. Gavin Rad was speechless. In the other team, Sylvanas was unsatisfied. Damn it, Duque used us as a cover again, and then went to do bad things in the dark. Tyrant, the high priest in a white robe, shrugged. When has he not been full of bad ideas, secretly causing trouble, and then maximizing the benefits? I just didn't think that he would actually be interested in someone else's fortress. Jaina looked Naxxramas up and down. The fortress that had been an eyesore suddenly became cute. Only after commanding a floating castle do I feel that my capital is so weak. I really want to pull Naxxramas over Kul Tiras. Kalia put her hands on her hips. Come on. In my opinion, Duque should either put this thing in the blasted land to guard the dark portal, or Stormwind City. None of us should fight over it. Kalia's words made sense, and the women were actually speechless. While the experts of the Alliance were chatting peacefully, in the various regions, with the Hall as the unit, giant protective walls were descending. With a rumbling sound, the entire Naxxramas was cut into countless independent spaces. Then, either flames or freezing air that was close to absolute zero began to pour into these spaces from the pipes in every corner. Farina could raise spiders before, but she couldn't give them orders because their master was Meissner, who had been killed by Duque. Now, the focus of the cleanup was naturally the spider area. Whoosh! In the spider area, it was as if an active volcano was erupting, and flames were everywhere. A strong fire tornado spun in the huge space, connecting the sky and earth, not leaving any corner untouched. Those spider eggs were unlucky. Without their mother's care, there was a high chance that they wouldn't be able to hatch. Now, they were directly sucked in and turned into charcoal. Even the spider eggs buried deep in the thick gelatinous soil were forcibly dug out by the strong fire tornado and thrown in all directions. Most spiders weighing less than 100 kilograms were directly rolled up and slammed into the hard stone walls, first turning into large meat patties, then into charcoal. As for the heavier spiders, they were often hit by all kinds of flying debris. For example, a large tarantula's head was cut in half by a piece of tile, and it became a corpse before the fire tornado hit. The remaining 4 groups of bosses in the fortress were forcibly locked in by the huge isolation wall, unable to come out. Chapter 1258. What's going on? Blamo, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, asked in a deep voice. I have a bad feeling, Sir Zeliek said. Ever since Farina ordered all the troops to be mobilized to deal with the Heavenbreaker, I felt that it was very strange, the dwarf Death Knight, Lord Kurtaz, said in a low voice. Although I don't want to doubt my colleagues with the worst attitude, I'm sure that Farina betrayed the Scourge army. Otherwise, there's no way to explain why we're trapped and can't get any reply, the more experienced Death Knight, Baron Rivendare, said. Unable to drag Ashbringer Mograine down, Kel Thuzad could only pull Rivendare over, the leader of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. As the leader of the 4 horsemen, Rivendare's words were the final conclusion. The other 3 Death Knights looked at each other and Kurtaz made his move. Meteor. The huge skeleton staff was raised, and a large meteor fireball the size of a horse carriage suddenly appeared from the void, striking the huge isolation door with a terrifying momentum. Bang! The so-called thunder was loud but the rain was small. This was how the current situation was described. Kurtaz showed a bitter expression. No, the isolation door is too thick, and it's covered with King City-level magic protection spells. I can't break through it by force. It wasn't just the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the other bosses encountered the same problem. The structure area boss Thaddeus, who looked like a Frankenstein and was completely a giant, used up all of his lightning energy, but couldn't shake the door at all. In the Frost Dragon's lair, the Ice Dragon Saffron stood together with Kel Thuzad. The Ice Dragon watched Kel Thuzad cast one magic after another in vain. Damn it! Damn it! Why is it like this? Kel Thuzad was going crazy. The Frost Dragon's lair was clearly the core area of the entire stronghold. In order to prevent possible enemies from sneaking in, the Frost Dragon's area was specially sealed with a large 3-dimensional magic formation, turning it into a special space that was almost completely independent from the stronghold. But now, the teleportation circle that was supposed to be unimpeded was sealed. Even though Kel Thuzad and Saffron were here, they could only watch helplessly. They couldn't do anything. That kind of anger, even though Kel Thuzad was an undead, made him feel like his soul was about to explode. It seemed that the remnants of the Scourge in the stronghold would be defeated one by one. Since this would become a reality, Kel Thuzad understood that he had to do something. Otherwise, he would soon follow in the footsteps of his miserable subordinates and be dealt with by Duque. Kel Thuzad pulled out a scarlet flame from his chest, and his eyes glowed red. It seems that we have no other choice. Saffron, come with me. In the name of the great Lich King Arthas, I command you. Realizing what Kel Thuzad wanted to do, Saffron's remaining dragon instincts instinctively rejected Kel Thuzad. Unfortunately, before it was a dragon, it was already an undead. A great lich and a frost wyrm that only had bones left. They confronted each other for a full 5 minutes. In the end, the lich, who borrowed the name of the Lich King, won. Unwillingly and unwillingly, Saffron finally lowered its noble head. In the stronghold, after nearly an hour of marching, the 2 alliance teams finally met, and Duque also appeared when the 2 teams met. Holy light above, how did you do it? Tyrion Fordring asked Duque. Duque was not vague and directly explained the general process, which made the Alliance powerhouses shout in surprise. What? This stronghold is actually a creation left behind by the Titans, and you used another Titan creation to control it? Jaina's eyes widened. Not to mention her, even the most imaginative person would not have thought that an enemy's stronghold could be dealt with in this way. Although strongholds were the easiest to break through from the inside, this was too easy. Duque smiled. Actually, long before I brought Naxxramas to the Temple of Ankh-Kiraj and let Bones and the insects fight non-stop, you should have known that I had a considerable amount of control over this stronghold. Why hasn't Kel-Thuzad given up? Kalia was very timely and curious. Because I knew from the beginning that he was a gambling addict. As long as he could still gamble, he would never admit defeat. Duque's evaluation of Kel-Thuzad was really right. In this world, there were always some people who thought that they were smarter than others, insisted on their own opinions and ideas, and refused any persuasion. They were determined to go all the way. Many years ago, when Antonidas discovered that Kel-Thuzad, who was still a human, was conducting various taboo undead experiments, Antonidas used thunderous methods to stop his research. Later on, when Duque intervened, he ruthlessly tricked Kel-Thuzad and severely injured his soul. But nothing could compare to Kel-Thuzad's stubbornness. His stubbornness was so terrible that he didn't even hesitate to devour other souls to recreate a theoretically complete lich soul. He had been destroyed by Arthas once as a lich, and was resurrected again in the Sunwell. As long as he didn't achieve his goal, he dared to work hard again and again, to seek death. So Duque was very sure that Kel-Thuzad would never be willing to give up Naxxramas, even at this moment, when Duque had successfully controlled Naxxrama's system. Duque curled his lips. Although I don't hate people who have principles and are willing to persevere to the end, as an enemy, he's too annoying. Okay, everyone, it's time to work. We'll go clean up the remaining 2 areas first, and then we'll deal with this despicable person who caused Arthas to fall. Duque's words made the eyes of several strong people from Lordaeron light up. Everyone began to move. At this time, Queen Sylvie came up. You subdued the enemy's commander, that black witch called Farina? Duque blinked. How did you know? Come on, every single Death Knight who fought with us was cursing her. I'm not deaf. I heard that this woman used to have a bad reputation in Lordaeron. Kalia nodded. Yeah, even I heard about it. Duque sighed and answered truthfully, well, that's true. But I shadowed her body and soul. Now she's my elemental emissary. Elemental emissary? Jaina was curious. I found that the demigod path I'm going to take is different from many demigods in the past. It seems that I'm going to gather the divinity of fire, ice, arcane, holy, and shadow. In order to reduce the burden on my body and soul, I'm going to set up 5 elemental emissaries whose souls are attached to me. Duque's whimsical ideas and practices shocked his women. Chapter 1259. 5 Elemental Emissaries? In other words, Duque was going to become a god with 5 powers at the same time? Was it really going to be that easy? Every woman was stunned by Duque's bold and arrogant words. In fact, Duque also had a portion of nature divinity from the Wind Prince, but Duque was a little uncertain about it. In Duque's mind, if he really couldn't handle it, he could strategically give up this portion of divinity, so Duque didn't mention it. After all, in Duque's impression, those who were good at nature were either druids or shamans, which didn't match his horoscope. Is that possible? When Jaina asked, her voice sounded like she was sleepwalking. Actually, it's possible. What I'm doing now is a bit similar to that of warlocks. It's just that warlocks obtain greater power through summoning in contracts, as well as share their burdens. As long as a warlock's soul is strong enough, he can theoretically summon several powerful summons at the same time. But you're not a warlock, and the mechanism is different, right? Jaina asked. It is indeed different. Duque nodded. But ever since I accepted Majordomo in the molten core and gave him some divine power, binding his soul and life to mine, I found that this is a very suitable path for me. At this time, Tyron said, Duque, your choice is probably right. Even a Lun can't easily release her power across time and space. Even God needs a spokesperson. For example, I am the High Priest. I can borrow a Lun's power, and at the same time, I'm one of the cornerstones of her power. In terms of apotheosizing, Tyron's opinion was far more convincing than others. For a moment, everyone didn't know what to say. Duque, can you handle it? Aurelia asked worriedly. I'm the best at multitasking. As he spoke, dozens of magic hands flew around Duque, and each magic hand made a different gesture. The girls looked at each other and saw each other's eyes. In the end, it was Aurelia who spoke. All right, Duque, you've convinced us. Jaina, then do you have a target for the elemental emissaries in your heart? Basically. Majordomo Executus was the fire element, and Farina was the shadow element. As for the rest, please allow me to keep it a secret for now. Aurelia gently pulled Duque's hand. It's good that you know what you're doing. Remember, don't force yourself. We all know that you seek a power that can protect Azeroth. But some things were better to let nature take its course. Even if you don't think about yourself, you should think about us. At this point, Aurelia's voice became softer. Especially, you don't even have a child. No matter how valiant and resolute the queens were in front of the people, all of them suddenly became bashful. Their faces were all red. Ah! Are there many ants on the ground? Ah! The patterns on the ceiling are so beautiful, needless to say, Aurelia and Sasha, who were the first to follow Duque. The four queens had long been whispering together, discussing how to hide it from the people below if Duque could not give them a status. Now even Tyron seemed to be talking to herself. I wonder if Elun will allow the High Priest this. Duque was speechless. Well, my soul is a little special. It seems that I can only bestow souls upon my descendants when I become a demigod, all right. Hurry up and become a demigod. The 7 voices were so unified, and the 14 gazes were so passionate that it almost scared Duque. When the time comes, maybe when the world is at peace, we can even use Naxxramas as a palace to travel around the world, Kalia, who had the most girl's imagination, said in her sweet voice. Duque was stunned for a moment, and then immediately came back to his senses. Yes. Ever since his transmigration, his nerves had been stretched taut. His eyes were on the present, or on the future where the crisis of the world was becoming more and more imminent, but not on the longer-term future. What would happen after the Burning Legion was taken care of? Perhaps it would be a good choice to use the great Naxxramas as a flashy palace, and wander around wherever he went. Under Duque's mental command, Naxxramas opened part of the dome on the ceiling. It seemed that because of the sunlight penetrating through, the aura of death in the fortress was all driven away. The sunlight shone on the ancient walls that were like white powder, the deep winding corridors, the hooked staircases, the strange-looking statues, the wide and magnificent glass windows, the floating shadows, the clanking of the armors of Gavin Rad and the others in front, and finally the towering dome that always looked down on you, and always looked down on the reincarnation of history. All of this was playing out scenes from ancient and modern legends. He had not realized before that the architectural style of Naxxramas was actually quite artistic. This idea sounded quite interesting. A charming smile appeared at the corner of Duque's mouth. Seeing Duque smile, Kalia and the other girls also smiled faintly. Duque raised his right index finger and shook it. Don't think that I will easily raise a flag or something. Countless movies and animations have proven that the guy who says, after this war, I'll go back to my hometown to get married, will definitely die. Well, even if I die, I will still resurrect, so, Duque made an inscrutable smile, letting the girls think that they knew, and that would be good. The team continued to move forward because all the monsters had been dealt with by Duque, and this march was more like an armed parade. Soon, everyone arrived in front of the hall where the final boss of the construction area, Thaddeus, was. Do you remember the main points I said? You must remember, otherwise if you stand together with different polarities, then everyone will die together. Although I don't want to put pressure on everyone, there is only one chance to deal with this guy. Duque repeatedly emphasized. This was not a joke. Thaddeus, who looked like a Frankenstein, was himself a Lich's test subject. This giant, which was sewn together from the severed limbs of many giants, had the power to control thunder and lightning. The most special and disgusting thing about him was that every once in a while, he would add an electric charge to the enemies that besieged him. Either it was a positive charge or a negative charge. Electric charges of the same polarity superimposed together would increase the attack power of all the companions around them. If electric charges of opposite polarity were stuck within 8 yards, then he. After adding the charge for 5 seconds, if the opposite polarity was still standing together, then there would be a chain of explosions. The power of the explosion was determined by the number of people around who were charged. If there were only 2 idiots standing together, then at most 2 would die. If it was a group of people, it would be a matter of an instant. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.